Welcome, everyone. I'm Chrissy Castle with Penn State and a member of the UEvents Steering Committee. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to attend UEvents' first virtual conference, the University President Transition Strategies for Onboarding, Engaging, and Bidding Farewell. I'm really pleased to see representatives from over 30 institutions in attendance. So most of us are donor constituent relations professionals who have responsibilities that are focused on event planning and execution, events that facilitate the engagement and stewardship of the institution's alumni and benefactors. There are some joining us today who work directly for the university's president with varying and wide ranges of responsibilities. We all know that our jobs are not in silos, that we must work and collaborate with countless campus units, offices, vendors, the list goes on. So regardless of the role you fill at your institution, we welcome you to the group. Hope you'll stay connected, participate in future UEvent offerings, and at the end of this conference, feel that it was worth your time you committed to attend. This afternoon, as you know, we will focus on events and strategies centered around the university president. Across higher education, there appears to be a revolving door in terms of the university presidents resigning and retiring, which then results in the hiring and onboarding of a new president and saying farewell to one who is departing. Within the last year, I've heard several of my colleagues mention they have just completed an inauguration of their president or are in the planning stages. Here at Penn State, we bid farewell to our president of 8 years in May of last year and welcome the university's 19th president immediately following. Whether you have a new president or one who has been with your institution for some time, we all know the importance and the need to engage the president with donors, alumni, students, faculty, and local communities. Sharing the president's vision and goals, both short and long term, can be woven into events and messaging. We hope to learn from our peers and take away a couple of best practices to incorporate into our existing plans or hear something that will inspire us. After we hear from our keynote speaker, Jen Birch with Leadwell Academy, who will share her experience, best practices, and advice to navigating change, we'll move into our breakout sessions. After each track, we'll have an opportunity to regroup and talk about the highlights. We hope to gain insight from others and take away strategies to improve future presidential events. As a reminder, the sessions will be recorded and will be available after the conference. I'm pleased to turn this over to Lindsay Belland, Senior Event Coordinator with the University of Minnesota Foundation and co-chair of the UEvents Steering Committee. Lindsay?
Thank you, Chrissy, and welcome again, UEvents members. On behalf of our steering committee, we are thrilled to have you join us here today. As Chrissy mentioned, I work as a senior events coordinator for the University of Minnesota Foundation, and I'm honored to introduce you to this morning's keynote speaker, Jen Birch. I have had the privilege of working side by side with Jen over the last 5 years in a variety of volunteer capacities, and I have personally attended multiple leadership and professional development workshops facilitated by Jen. Each of these experiences have been incredible. I've learned valuable new wisdom, experienced personal and professional growth, and have had a blast connecting and collaborating with colleagues. Jen began her company in 2007. Today, her focus is Leadwell Academy, where Jen helps make leading and empowering easier. This hybrid leadership development program is unmatched in its outcomes and measurable benefit to organizations, entrepreneurs, and senior leaders around the globe. In her personal life, Jen is a highly active member of her community, an avid and competitive tennis player, and an energetic and involved matriarch to her family. In writing this intro, I asked Jen for 3 words that she would use to describe herself. The words that she chose were positive, empowering, and curious. After knowing Jen and experiencing the impact of her coaching firsthand, I'm confident that you'll depart today's professional development session feeling even more positive, empowered, and curious about the new opportunities and experiences change has to offer us. So with these words in mind, and as Jen begins to pull up her slides, I would like to hand it over to Jen Birch as she leads us through our keynote session, best practices and guidance for navigating change in all aspects of our lives. Jen, welcome. I know you had a question for the group to kick us off. Can you tell us what it is?
Hi, Lindsay. Thank you. I sure can. And I want to say hello, Anne, and thank you, and Chrissy, and Lindsay. I'm delighted to be here. Okay, well, my slides came up pretty fast, actually, so I'm going to hold the question. You actually have it in your notes. Now, if you didn't get the notes, I'm going to drop them here quickly in the chat, or maybe, Anne, you might even here, I'll drop them quickly. The question that we're going to look at right off the bat is, I want you to think about a time where you resolved to change something in your personal life or in your work life. Just think about a time. And I want you to actually drop it in the chat for me. And by the way, if you didn't get the notes and you love to take notes, there's an version of notes where you can fill in the Google Doc, or there's a PDF download, and there it is right there in the chat for you. Okay. Yes. So guys, that's what I want you to do, is think about a time when you resolved to make a change at work or home. Okay. Now, before I get started, I do need to say thank you, because I asked for some pre-event information about change and what it was like to have a university president leave. What was it like? And all these 12 people helped me get some context so I could understand what it would be like to be, and what's important to you today. And here's an interesting fact that came up. Fear of the unknown. The top 3 things that were most difficult about dealing with change in personal life: fear of the unknown, the extra time and effort required. And I want you to think about that one. We all need extra time to deal with change, and loss of control. And fear of the unknown is the biggest thing about dealing with welcoming a new university president or losing your old one. And so thank you. And Miss Robin Ellis, University of Washington, thank you. This is the shirt you get if you, this way, working on these slides. This is the shirt you get if you haven't received it at your house yet. Robin, it's coming your way. Tell us in the chat if you received it. That's a great way to kind of connect in these virtual settings, is by, yes, like Lindsay's doing a little emoticon up above or in the chat. You can tell us in the chat. So Robin, if you're here, thank you. Okay, so, I want you to imagine what it would look like to lead yourself better through change, to lead yourself even better through a transition. Just think about that for a minute. Better than you currently do. Now, on average, I think the number was about 7 when I asked you in the survey if you like change. You said about a 7 out of 10. So really, we're not here to, you guys you deal with a lot of change clearly in your position in donor relations and in, the developing relationships with constituents, that you're not any strangers to change. In fact, when I asked for some great, commentary about what do you say to yourself to help navigate change well, there's the only constant in life is change. Change equals growth. Got to take one day at a time. I love this one. Someone had a paperweight that says, this is one of my favorite quotes too, Winston Churchill: if you're going through hell, keep going. Probably a good one to remember at times when change is getting difficult. Now, here is the thing, though, about change. It's not necessarily the change that's painful. Tell me if you guys agree. It's the resistance to change that's painful, okay? Now, that's the first blank on your handout there. So you can get that, set that up for yourself and start filling that out. Here is something to think about. The greater our ignorance around something that we're dealing with, the change. I'm just thinking of examples, but one was about when my mom passed away, and I didn't want to sound morbid, but I'll be honest, I didn't have it was my first parent who passed away a year and a half ago. I learned so much about, and hospice is really what I'm thinking about. I learned so much about walking through hospice and how helpful it was. because I practiced these 5 principles that I'm going to share with you today, these 5 practices, I think it was an easier experience for me. And I'm not saying, I mean, everyone's journey of death is their own, right? Of course. But practicing these principles today really helped me embrace that really difficult change in my life. So think about that. The greater our ignorance to something, the greater our resistance to the change. So when I asked you to think about that time that you resolved to make a change at work or home, I'd love you to drop it in the chat. So just go ahead and drop it in the chat. Say, here's what, what did you change? I'd love to hear it. You guys are a quiet group so far. I don't see, am I seeing the chat? I don't see any chat yet. I'd love to see from you guys. So when I was thinking about this, some of the things one of the topics that I worked on changing is reducing my work schedule from 40 hours a week to 30. And then because I had my own business, I even decided when I had young kids at home, you know what, I'm not getting the things done I want to get done. I want to move from 30 to 20. And so I was excited to change my schedule. Lindsay, changing some eating habits. Okay, great. Thank you. Think about that. Toss it in the chat. What is something? I know one time I made a change from going from a PC to a Mac. That was a tough change, but it was also exciting. I was so excited to have a fancy Mac. When my husband retired, yes, and is at home. Your attitude, love this. Thank you. Now we're getting some sharing. Keep sharing. The more you participate in your learning today, the more you're going to enjoy it. Here we go. Here we go. Now we're talking. I love it. I love seeing the chat light up. Change in your career after 15 years, introducing a new technology. Oof, absolutely, right? Work-life balance, yes. Moving to a new state, oh my gosh, anytime you move to a new place. Downsizing, these are great examples. I want you guys to get vivid examples in your mind. Now, what does it feel like to change? Think about that. It's exciting. I'm so excited to move myself. I mean, from 30 hours to 20 hours, I was excited. And some change isn't that exciting. Some is maybe scary, but we start changing, right? We start plotting, we start moving towards this new habit, the new job. We start working better on work-life balance. I have a client who, at the end of working with me, she said, I traded over work, being the problem solver at work for a yoga mat. She worked on work-life balance. I love that one, right? But I'll tell you what, we set out to make this change and then we hit something, we bump into it and we start to backslide. And that's the very first thing we're going to talk about. And if you don't have your handout, this is what it looks like. We're going to start looking at practice number 1. Be aware of how homeostasis works as it relates to change. Now, if you're like me, I don't necessarily use this word homeostasis a lot, but the one thing that I thought about was, our body has a homeostasis, our body temperature, right? And think about this. When our body temperature increases even less than 2 degrees, that's when alarms go off and say, whoa, wait a second, I have a fever. Something's going on with my body. When we are navigating change, my friends, we need to remember how homeostasis works. So we're going to look at 5 points to support each practice. One of the challenges, before I jump into those 5, is we get this immunity to change. That's really what this homeostasis is. And I love this phrase. This came from an author from Harvard. I don't know if we have somebody from Harvard here today. I think I saw somebody in the survey. So maybe we do. Say hello if you do. Robert Keegan is a professor at your university, and he wrote a book called Immunity to Change. And I loved the title because it's exactly this idea of it's tough to change. I'm going to talk about something Robert shared a little bit later, so keep that in mind. Okay, number 1 under be aware of homeostasis and how it works is expected. Brothers and sisters, it is going to come. It's not a matter of homeostasis. And another way to think of homeostasis is your comfort zone. Do you know how some people have said, let's see, I think you'll be able to see this. Yes, here's a card I'm going to share with you later. Life begins at the end of your comfort zone. When it starts to feel like you're getting out of your comfort zone, right? That's when you're bumping into homeostasis. So it's a fancy word. So not only do I want you to expect it, I want you to think about what would it be like if you welcomed it? Yes, I love that too, Sarah. Be comfortable with the uncomfortable. Sarah, you probably are a pro at navigating change. Okay, notice your body's alarms. That's number 2 under practice 1. What I want you to think about is our body's alarms for what is too much. What is too much? When I started to reduce my schedule from 30 hours to 20 hours, it was really hard for me. I was worried that I was going to lose clients. I know when I say it's hard for me, people are like, oh, really? I feel so sorry for you. I wish I could work 20 hours. I know I've heard that. But what I'm saying is it was hard for me to get out of the habit of working so much. It was hard for me to take Fridays off. And I felt guilty to say I'm taking Fridays off. So my body's alarm was going, hey, really? You're lazy. No, you're not. You're not crazy or lazy. You're bumping into homeostasis. Okay, let's look at number 3 under there. Resistance means we're changing. That's all. It means we're changing. It's okay. We don't have to be so worried about it. We can celebrate it instead of resist. Okay. Celebrate. That's the other blank there. Instead of resist. Might help. Tell me in the chat if I'm giving you kind of enough prompting to tell you when you have a blank, if anyone needs me to do a little more specific. I'm guessing you're good. Let's look at number 4. Don't give up at the first sign of pain or panic. You will have pain. You will have some panic as we're bumping into change. It's going to be a little uncomfortable, right? Let's get comfortable with the uncomfortable, like Sarah said. Right? I want you to think about this for a minute and pop over to the chat. Where have you noticed homeostasis getting in your way? Where have you noticed? Think about that. Maybe even in that, when you're talking about entering your 30s, when you're talking about moving to a new state. Lisa, when you were downsizing, where did homeostasis bump in your way? Go ahead and just drop it in the chat and I'm going to keep sharing. And I'd love to see that. Yeah. So tell me, where have you bumped into homeostasis? Number 5. This is an interesting one to remember. As you change things, as you bump into homeostasis, others in your circle will also experience resistance as you start to change. So as you start to make a change, if there's people in your life, I remember one time my husband, I'm going to go back to this example of me moving from 30 hours to 20. I remember one time it was almost a little hard for my husband. I think he might have been jealous or frustrated or, like you have every Friday off. What are you doing? It was interesting for me to notice how it was kind of rough for him as I was changing my habit. Let's see, getting rid of stuff, work-life balance. We're bumping into homeostasis. Okay, these are good. Okay, so those are the 5 things that help you stay aware of homeostasis. I don't know about you, but I think it's so interesting to think of the homeostasis of the mind. That's really the comfort, like that comfort zone, right? That we stay in. And as you think about navigating and onboarding or transitioning out a president, just coming back to that for a minute, because these principles and practices you're going to be able to use in your life and at work. Just want you to think about that. How it can be helpful to have more awareness of when you're there. Okay, let's see where we're headed next here. Number 2, now this one, negotiate with resistance. Goodness, this is probably one of my favorite. I think understanding this practice is probably your biggest advantage. Negotiate with resistance. Now, here's a fun definition that I found of negotiation. I'll drop it in the chat just so you guys can see it too. Okay, it's a delicate dance of empathy, compromise, and assertiveness, aiming for a win-win. Now, isn't that interesting to think about when we negotiate with our own resistance? Okay, I'm thinking about as you notice your own resistance, instead of just saying, oh, no, I don't want that. What if you could say, oh, I'm going to negotiate with you a little bit. I'm going to treat myself with some empathy. I'm going to treat myself with, I'm going to think about a compromise here. It's not all or nothing. I'm going to negotiate with the resistance. Okay, think about that. You guys can give me some top, if you like this, if you like what we're talking about here. Oh, good. I'm already seeing some love in the chat. Okay, what does this look like? Okay, it's our ticket to long-term successful change. If you can't negotiate, you know, those people that say, oh, I hate change, or if you're just giving in to all of your resistance, it's going to be really hard, and you're probably going to take longer to do something that wouldn't take you as much time. Number 2, be willing to take 2 steps back and 1 step forward. I don't know about you, but this is a difficult one. When I was working on reducing my schedule, I said yes to way too many things on Friday. I was supposed to be having Fridays off. That was my big aha moment. I needed more time to be with my kids, and I would find myself on a Friday. I'd steal from myself and I'd schedule, and pretty soon I'd be working 4 hours, and then I'd be mad. What happened? Why am I working on the day I'm supposed to be off? Well, I have some control of that, and I made 2 steps forward, and boom, I'm making 1 step back. So we have to be willing to do that. I'm telling you, I think this is so helpful. And remember when I was talking about Robert Keegan from Harvard, who wrote a book called Immunity to Change? Well, when he talks about how to deal with resistance, and check this out, he says we need to take safe, modest risks. Boy, I don't know about you guys, but when I was first hearing him talk about this, I had a visceral reaction in my body to this. I'm like, safe, modest risks? Come on, who wants to take safe, modest risks? Don't you want to take big risks, right? We live in this world of go for the gusto. And honestly, it's so much better if you take safe, modest risks. I have a fun story I'm going to share with you about a client of mine named Laura in a little bit. Okay, stealing from yourself. Fascinating perspective we have in the chat. Yeah, isn't that interesting? Interesting. Okay, under negotiate with resistance, practice number 2, another way to help us do this is you have to push through this. You're going to have warning signs and warning signals. And this, I don't usually say push through this part. It feels a little, I don't know. I just don't always like that word push. I'd rather like allow, but maybe that's even a better word. Allow this part despite the warning signals. Okay. Number 4 is stay alert. Be prepared for negotiation, my friends. As I'm working with people on coaching, different challenges, you know, maybe somebody says, I have a coworker who is so difficult. They are not picking up they're just not they're not engaging. They're not doing their job. Jen, what am I supposed to do? Well, the first thing I say is, let's first think about what's in your control. And that's one of this kind of a side piece of advice here, brothers and sisters, is there's going to be probably 70% of the things that aren't in your control, and 30% that is within your control. You will have a much more enjoyable life if you can stay focused on what can I control. Control the controllables, right? Stay alert, be prepared for negotiation. And number 5, remember, resistance is going to show up in a variety of ways. And I'm going to tell you what those are. Those are your blanks. It shows up in, whoops, I moved too far. It shows up as anxiety, self-sabotage, squabbles with coworkers. I have another training I do all about rumbling, being willing to rumble at work. And it is so good. I mean, we're going to have it. We're going to have some resistance show up in different ways. Okay, so just negotiating with resistance. Think of it like a dance, right? Okay, so I'm wondering, what's your mindset when you get that step back? The 1 step forward, 1 step back. I want you to think about that and think about your own example so far. What's been your mindset, or what is your mindset? I mean, mine was when I was scheduling myself on Fridays, mine was, I'm no good at this. I'm frustrated. I'm mad. I don't like this. Why I'm pissed off, actually, honestly, that I'm working on Fridays and I don't want to work on Friday. I mean, I was frustrated. I'm going to tell you about a client though I had named Laura. And Laura, I think she's such a great example of negotiating with resistance. So you can put your notes down for a second. Laura had a goal of achieving, well, let's say this, Laura had a promotion, and in order to retain her promotion, she had to have a certain level of productivity. Well, Laura, and let's say 8 sales a month. Laura came to me and had lost and was not doing 8 sales a month. So she'd lost some of her opportunity with that promotion, and she needed to get it back. And she said, Jen, I need you to help me get 8 sales a month. Okay, that's what we're going to coach on. Okay, so we coached on it. Laura came up with a great plan. Here's what she's going to do to get 8 sales a month. She went off, she worked on her plan. She came back 2 weeks later for her coaching session. Jen, I am at 0. I didn't get any sales. I'm so frustrated. I'm so mad. And I said, well, let's talk about that. We talked about it, and Laura decided 8 is the right goal, even though I started to talk about negotiating with resistance, that there might be some resistance. No, Jen. If I don't do 8, I will be, I mean, anybody who's good in this work that I'm doing sells 8. That's easy. I should be able to sell 8, no problem. She started doing what I call shoulding on herself. She was shoulding a lot. I should be able to do it, right? Shoulding. Well, Laura came back 2 weeks later and she had 0 sales again. And I said, Laura, let me talk to you, honey. Here, we got to talk about your goal. I think we might need to adjust the number. Would you be willing to adjust the number? No, absolutely not. I cannot do it. We were in a proverbial arm wrestling match over Zoom. I've been working on Zoom before it was cool, by the way, for probably 7 years, maybe 8. This is a lot of the way I do work, and actually it can be really effective. So Laura and she said, no, I will not. I can't do it, Jen. It goes against everything. It goes against my identity. So she went off and with her plan, revised plan, and she came back and she was at 0. You're getting the picture here. Laura finally, with reluctance, decided to make her goal lower. And I said, Laura, what absolutely beyond a reasonable doubt do you know you can do? Well, I know I can sell 3. Anybody can do 3. And I said, well, let's make that your goal. Okay. I don't like this, Jen, because I just don't, it really resisted, like this idea of who she was and who she needed to be. It was resisting. Well, Laura came back the next session. She had 6 sales. And the week after that, or the couple weeks after that, she had 10. She just kept going. Laura got momentum. That's what Laura got. And this is the note I got from Laura. I just wanted to send you a note after our call last week. The peace I feel in my heart is amazing. And I wouldn't have it yet if it wasn't for you pushing me out of my comfort zone. I appreciate you. So, we can learn from Laura. We can learn from Laura and do it a little bit better. Okay. And I was a part of Laura's support team. That's practice number 3, is develop a support team. Now, first of all, I want to just applaud Lindsay and Chrissy and Ann and the steering committee here of UEvents, because I don't hardly even need to talk about this one. This is the best support team ever. And it's so relevant for the way you guys are doing business, and you're coming together on Zoom and sharing best practices. It's brilliant. I think it's so great. It's so great. So let's look at developing a support team. And you might even say to yourself, well, a support team, when I get a new president, well, why not? Here's a good start. Here's what you can think about as you think about building your support team. Sure, you can do it alone, but it's so much more fun to share joy and perils with a community. And honestly, I really believe, after working with people for 16 years, we're just created for community. We're created to share. And I mean, honestly, there are days I could just, like, I have this little joke. It's of putting duct tape over your mouth to listen longer when I'm working with leaders to help them build their leadership skills. Believe it or not, the basic skill of leadership is, you guessed it, listening. And there are so many times when I will click my mute button, especially when I used to just do phone coaching. I'd click my mute button and I would leave an awkward silence. And all of a sudden, the person would just keep talking about something that they were really thinking about. And it was amazing. And that brings us to, it's actually the third point, but we'll come to that. To support team, when they're going through similar things, it'll help you foster understanding. And ladies and gentlemen, it feels good to be understood. And brainstorming. I love a little hot tip is to do some ping pong brainstorming when someone's stuck. If someone's stuck, don't just necessarily say, oh, here's a bunch of advice I'm going to give you. Say, hey, let's do ping pong brainstorming. That means I'm going to toss you an idea and Annetta, you're going to toss me one back. I'm going to toss you one. You're going to toss me one back. We're going to play back and forth. I'm not just going to be an advice monster and come in and tell you what I think you should do. 2 reasons that's no good. First of all, Annetta's brilliant. Let's see what we can do to foster some of that brilliance out of her. Let's do that. And it's not about me. It's about her. What if she has a better idea than I even could think of? Okay. I'm digressing a bit, but you're kind of getting the idea. Find someone who listens as well as shares, okay? It's nice to have shares, of course. And you know what? I think we're actually kind of conditioned to advice. We get really, we just want it. We get stuck. And it's like, oh, I just want the person who can tell me the magic formula. And there is another secret that there isn't always a magic formula. That's why navigating change is so important. Your experience that you're practicing and you're transitioning the president, there might be a lot of similarities and you can certainly use best practices. And you also have to remember that you've got to, at the end of the day, you've got to experiment and figure out how your mojo kind of shows up in that situation and how you're going to navigate it because you're unique. Okay, also find some people who will hold that gap. Brace you up and encourage you when you're doing well. Boy, in one of our courses, it's actually one of the programs I'm going to give you guys a deal on today. There's a whole chapter on celebrate and repeat. It's so hard for people to celebrate, I've noticed. And positivity is one of my top strengths. And I used to be a little reluctant to even encourage people to share because I've been called like Pollyanna by some of my brothers once in a while. But you know what? I've realized it's part of what I'm here to do is teach people how to celebrate and notice what's working. Who would you add to your support team? I just want you to drop some initials in the chat. So I'd love to hear from everybody. We have 72 people here. I want this chat just lighten up. Who could you add to your support team? And if your first thought is, I don't know, keep going. I had a client who said that one time and I did the little duct tape trick and she kept thinking and all of a sudden she thought of somebody who could help her solve a big problem. A coworker was right there. Okay, let's look at that next practice. Practice number 4, follow a regular practice. Now I'm using practice here a little bit more like a noun than a verb. Okay, it's almost like the rhythms. Find some rhythms, find some practice. For me, when I was doing that, back to that work example, good job, everybody, by the way. Love it. Thanks, Piper, Mimi, Tara, Nancy, I see you. Great. Keep sharing. Whose initials might you add? Who might you add to your support team? Who do you want? I want you to dream big a little bit too. Who would you love to have on your support team? Okay, let's talk about following a regular practice. Well, what's helpful about practice? It gives you stability and comfort. In the program, the coaching program that I run, Lead Well, we get together once a week and leaders practice actually just helping each other solve problems through coaching. You have to practice. You have to have a practice of doing something that you want to get better at. Well, again, you guys are practicing some of this right here in this UEvents group. Practice is the foundation for mastery. That's one of the reasons that following a practice is great. And practice is a habit. It should become a habit. Do you understand what I'm saying there? Practice becomes a habit. Okay, let's move on to Well, actually, I want to show you a practice that Christy was one of the workers or clients that I worked with, and fun enough, she works at a university. One of the practices that Christy built in was not checking email on vacation. Now, this was quite a while ago, but it was so interesting. She was really astounded. That was really her first big breakthrough of her personal leadership, realizing like, gosh, I don't have to check email when I'm on vacation. Now, she had to do a lot of things, and she had to change her habits. She had to stop answering email while she was on vacation. Number one, right? Control what you can control. And I thought this was just kind of interesting when she realized when she's at her best, she could help others do her best. I thought that was kind of helpful. Practice number 5, dedicate yourself to lifelong learning. Now, this you might, you're all working at university, so you're probably like, well, yeah, why not? Learning is a great thing. But let's think about it as you navigate change. It's more than book learning. It's about becoming a learner. So to me, this one is more about a mindset of being a learner. Okay. To learn is to change. If you think about it that way, to learn is to change. And education is a process that changes the learner. How do you, when Laura learned that moving from her goal of 8 to 3, think about the lesson that she learned. As long as she's willing to say, oh yeah, what did I learn here? And the best learning, I know I'm sounding like a Dr. Seuss book here, but the best learning involves learning to learn, learning to navigate change, learning to adapt, getting gritty, getting a little resilience. Okay, we are going to get ready to go in breakout rooms. And here's what I want you to do. This is a little tool that I use with my clients called the learning statement, okay? Because we are done with the 5 practices. And if you guys need me to repeat anything, we're going to have a Q&A after we go into the breakout room so we can review then. I didn't write this one on your handout, so you can do it in the additional notes section or just grab a piece of paper. This is a learning statement, and the way we use this is anytime you have learning, you can capture a learning statement. So what I'm going to invite you to do, you can either think about a learning you had today, or you can think about some learning you had when you had a transition of a president. So you can talk about either one. You can talk about something in your personal life, or something from today, or when you had a transition from a president. We're going to have you pair and share. So you're going to go in a breakout room with somebody and talk about this. You're going to be in there for about 5 minutes, I believe. We'll see how much we have time for. We'll let you know when it's time to switch roles. So when you're in the breakout room, one person's going to be sharing, well, here's what I learned. Here's my learning statement. And we're going to talk about that for a couple of minutes and what you learned. And then we're going to switch roles, and then you're going to listen, become a listener. And you're going to say, okay, tell me about your learning statement, buddy. If I'm in the group with Nancy, or in the little room with Nancy, then I'm going to listen to her, and she's going to be sharing. Now, here's what here's how the importance of this learning statement. I learned that here's what I learned. I'll give an example for my one that I was sharing. I learned that I need to occupy my time on Fridays. Therefore, I will join a tennis league. And that's exactly what I did. So that's an example. Now, here's what people end up doing a lot. They say, I learned that it's really helpful if you join a tennis league. Or I learned that it's really helpful if I have things that occupy my time on Fridays. Do you see the difference? If I say I learned that, a lot of times people will keep it out here and about a theory instead of about them. So the most important part here is the that I learned that I. So go ahead and write that on your papers. You won't have access to this slide, I don't believe, in the breakout room. So write this down and then and then write, therefore I will. And what will you do? What will you do? Because of that learning. I call this claiming your learning, and you guys can use this in so many areas. And the other thing that I want to share is what's helpful is you can also say relearned, because sometimes it's a relearning, or a rediscovery or a discovered. So you can change your verb if you don't like that word, learn. And why don't you tell me how many minutes we have for the breakout before we start Q&A so people can have an idea, or Lindsay?
We have about 3 minutes until 12:45. So
Great.
let me put everybody, if you're ready, I can put everybody into their breakout rooms.
Yes. Yes. I'm going to be popping into breakout rooms, so I might see you in there. Just have a little chat, share your learning statement, and make sure we'll give you a note to switch roles after about a minute and a half, so you can come on back in and we can talk about this.
All right, here you go.
Okay, have fun in the breakout room. I'm setting my timer.
I didn't assign a co-host because I didn't want to assign you, Jen.
Okay.
So,
Great. You co-hosts here can talk about your learning here in this main room.
Hey, Angie,
Yeah, let's talk. Actually, I'm going to stay in here with you guys because I think it'll be easier. It's such a short time. I don't want to interrupt the flow.
yeah, and Genki, I think if we went a minute or two over,
we did. So we'll stop it at like 1:44. No, 1:46.
yeah. Yeah, because that just, if that's okay with Jen, it eats in just a smidge into the Q&A.
Okay. And I'm just going to send a message here to say switch roles in the rooms in a moment. So somebody share a learning statement with us here in the main room. A brave soul.
Okay, I'll share. I learned that I am stagnant when I go home after work. And so therefore I will learn something new, which was to take golf lessons. So I'm in the process of taking golf lessons, actually with Anne and Brianna and about 5 or 6 other of my coworkers, and we go at lunch. Because our Penn State has a golf course that's close to our office. So we go on Wednesdays. And it's great. We've had a great time.
Nice. Nice. Love it. Thanks for being brave too, Chrissy. Do you want to pick somebody else who can share? One person?
No, let's see. How about,
Let's see. Anne Marie, are you back here? She didn't have
Yeah.
anyone in her breakout room. Anne Marie, do you want to share with us? We'd love to hear from you.
I'm happy to listen, actually. So
Okay.
you all continue. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you for letting us know what you need. To make it easy, I'll call on somebody, but you can always say no. How about Sam or Tiffany?
Yeah, I'm happy. I was taking a bunch of notes because this is helpful in both personal and professional. Right now, I feel like something I'm learning in real time is my fitness journey seems to take the same path every time, which is I start like really strong and I go all in and I'm like really excited because I'm a type A. And then I get to about where I am right now and it tapers off.
So let's hear your learning statement. What's your learning statement?
So I learned that I start strong and lose steam. Like,
okay.
And so therefore I will chart my path. I think I need to be more planful about what's right instead of like jumping all in. I need to be more intentional about taking a bite size that's sustainable. And so I'm literally in a class right now that I was going to like 1 million times a week and for like many hours, and I need to do like a couple of 30-minute sessions and let that be something I can continue.
Yes, absolutely. Whoops, did I mute myself? No, okay.
No,
that's great. I mean, you could apply these practices totally to that, right? It totally is exactly what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
So Jen, it's about 1:46. It's past, a little past that. I can give a minute for the participants in their breakout rooms to wrap up.
Yeah, or we can close it. I say close it and bring it because they'll have a few seconds anyway to wrap up. And
all right, here I go. I'm going to close it. I'm going to close the rooms then. Here we go.
Okay, so we are getting into a Q&A, and I'm also going to drop a link in the chat that is a survey of this portion. So if
Jen, excuse me for interrupting. Can we give it a second as people come into the room?
yes, absolutely. I will say it again. That way, if anybody is, yes, I will. Hello, welcome back. Welcome back. We're glad you're coming back. So now we have time for a Q&A. Comments, questions. What was it like to talk about your learning? What did you notice? Use headline statements so we can hear from as many people as possible in our short time. It's great to see all of your faces. So you can use the raise hand feature if you want to speak, or you can kind of wave your hand and we'll unmute you. Or you can unmute yourself. If we have somebody who talks, if somebody speaks over somebody, I'll just call on you if I can figure out who's talking. So go ahead. I know we have a lot of people in the room, but that's okay. I can call on you too if you don't raise your hand. Let me see. I don't see any raised hands yet. What was it like to share your learning with each other? Another question I might ask is, what one of the practices really resonated for you? Now I'm putting on my proverbial duct tape. Go ahead, Lindsay.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think what really resonates with me continually over and over again is the idea that resistance is normal. It's a really normal experience. And a switch for me has always been, instead of becoming maybe anxious about that resistance, becoming more curious. And so really approaching it from a curiosity standpoint of, okay, well, I feel these feelings and they're uncomfortable and they're likely due to growth and change and all of those things. And instead of being fearful of that, being curious about where that's really coming from. And so that was just another aha moment as you were talking about that earlier in the session today. So thank you for that. Resistance, normal.
Absolutely. And I love that mindset shift. It's helpful because to stay curious, I mean, that's sort of like a curious mindset instead of resisting. Empathy, assertiveness. I'm wondering what's over here. What's going on? Who else has something to share?
For me, the practice number one resonated the most with me. And that I think what I liked what you said about resistance means we're changing, celebrate instead of resisting it. And I think it's just changing your filter, right? Saying, okay, this is a change. It's going to be good. It's going to help us grow. We know we're going to come across things that we're not familiar with, which offers anxiety and stress. But if we work together as a team, like you said, build your team, build your system, we can push through it and embrace the change. And then, like you said, celebrate it. And we did that here at Penn State with our new president that started. She wanted to revamp the tailgates that were hosted before the games. And we found out about that in July, which was 2 short months before we had to host the first group of donors. And we were just scrambling like mad. We were excited, we were nervous, but in the end, we had enormous positive feedback from all of our donors. We issued out surveys after each game, got their feedback. The president and her chief of staff were thrilled. They were just really happy with it. So
nice.
Yeah.
So what I would encourage you to do, Chrissy, is even bring it to your team. Say, hey, let's all claim a learning from that experience. Even you saying, what did I learn about myself as a leader? Through that, put it in that learning statement phrase. It's unbelievable how that shifts and almost makes this learning nugget like, oh, this new piece that becomes a part of your wisdom. I see Sarah with your hand up. Sarah, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
I think we can.
Okay, I had some issues when I was in my breakout that it didn't work, but we were able to kind of chat with each other. I shared my, what I learned is I'm actually pretty forgetful at things, and I try and keep sticky notes and post-it notes wherever I can. And Diane, who was so gracious and chatted with me back, even though she couldn't hear me. She's like, "Have you tried OneNote? You're able to type anything down. It comes up on your phone. It's back on your Outlook as well when you come back online." But what really resonated as well with it was actually within the chat. When you don't go with change, you're kind of stealing from yourself in a way, and I don't want to do that. I want to be the best version of myself and continue to grow. So if I'm taking that resistance and not allowing myself to grow, I'm stealing from myself and not being able to be my best person for, professionally and, my own personal life.
Yeah, Sarah, that's good. Isn't that an interesting mindset shift to think about it like that? When I first heard it, I thought stealing. No, I'm not stealing. It was this, it's actually a yogic principle, comes from the yoga practice. Okay, Madison says, I absolutely in the same way, Sarah, love using Microsoft Planner. Okay, we're giving OneNote some love right now. That's so good. Who else has something to share or something that resonated or a question? Is anyone feeling resistance even about what I'm sharing? Believe it or not, that's usually one of the first things I do when I'm working with the team is I say, who's kind of not very excited about doing this coaching and training that we're doing? What is going to be hard about it? Let's get that out on the table. It's normal. See, isn't this interesting? As you start, if you sit down with your team or your project team and say, okay, guys, who's feeling some resistance about this transition? Let's get it. We don't have, I'm not saying let's turn into a negative festival for an hour, but I am saying validate and acknowledge the resistance and maybe even reteach this concept that I taught you to help people think about, well, how could we practice some empathy and get direct with ourselves and be assertive and negotiate? How can we dance with this resistance a little bit to say, okay, you're not going to conquer me. You're not going to kill me, but I'm not going to catapult myself out of my comfort zone, but I'm going to put my toe into the water. I did put a chat in the chat. I dropped a link and it's a wrap-up survey for our keynote talk here. So you can also click on that. Let's see. Hannah says that's such an interesting question to ask your team. Hannah, would you be willing to talk to me about what makes it feel counterproductive? But could you say more?
Yeah, well, I think sometimes when folks present a challenge at work, like a new project, something that maybe there is like very legitimate resistance or hesitation, or there's a change. The first move is for everyone to try to be really positive about it, at least outwardly. But I think it's like really interesting to invite people to share how they're feeling resisted, because I think that's not the first move a lot of people would make, and that's what I mean about like the counterintuitive. But I think that it sounds like a really good idea, though.
Well, honestly, if we really embrace this, like, what would it be like if you celebrated the resistance with your team? I mean, to me, that's like validating, like, you're right. This is, like, change does take extra time. It is a little bit hard. We are going to have some new habits. What kind of habits are we going to have to make ourselves successful? See, it invites you right into that next question. Okay, so if we do have that resistance, what could we do about that? Remember the what's within my control? 30%. Yes, there's probably 70% that's not within our control, but what is within our control? Okay, Madison, if you want to unmute yourself, I'm going to read your learning statement. This is awesome. I learned that I tend to be a little too proactive and can assume what people want. Therefore, I will take some time and ask what someone needs. I love that question. What do you need? What could I do to help? Madison, that is a an open-ended question, and that is what of the things that I work with leaders on all the time. And it's amazing how easy it is to forget that, right? And just assume. I mean, that's another chapter in one of the courses I we work with clients on, is assumptions. They can be so dangerous in a team. Okay, so
Yes, sorry, I'll just hop in real fast and
yes.
answer you. But so I originally worked at Indiana University for my first job out of college. And before I left, we went through a transition of leadership. And our previous president, he was very formal and he had a certain expectation of service. And it was certainly in line with what you would assume a presidential level of service is. But when our new president came in, she was much more informal, she was more casual, and she didn't want a lot of the things that were expected of us under the previous president. So it was definitely a learning curve of don't just assume that your new leadership wants the same as the previous, and figuring out what they want and asking them directly, what do you expect from us?
I think that's a great question. It really starts to set the expectations, and it helps you manage your expectations of yourself, which really is your emotional, that's building your emotional intelligence. Love it. I think we are getting ready. I think we're about out of time. Anne or Lindsay, help me, right? Are we about ready to wrap it up? Okay. Well, on your handout, there's a little QR code, guys, and I have some self-study programs, and they're normally like $129 and $497, but I put them 70% off to the end of the day through 4 o'clock today. If you scan that little code, you can check them out. They're the lessons that I use with all of my clients. And there's a mini course or the mastery for personal leadership. And like that client, Christy, that I showed you a picture of, those are all of the principles we worked on to help her lead herself better so she could lead her team better. I hope you have fun and embrace and stay curious, navigating change. And thank you so much for being here today. There's a lot of places you could have been. I'm glad you were here, and I'm really grateful that I was here.
So welcome to introducing your new president to donors and alumni session. I am Erin Dolsky from the University of Michigan, and I will be the breakout facilitator. I will be watching the chat and ensuring that we stay on time. And now I would like to introduce both of our speakers. We have Sam Frost, who is the Assistant Vice President of Constituent Experiences at Ohio State, and then Megan Brunell, who is the Director of University and Special Events at the University of New Hampshire. Take it away, ladies.
Hi, friends. Okay, I'm going to start sharing real quick. And when I do that, I'm going to rely on my friends if I can't see things going on in the chat for a little bit. So here we go. Okay, so I know we just got a lovely introduction from Erin. So just telling you a little bit more about sort of why we're hopefully the right people to talk about this. We're going to start by introducing ourselves. So Megan, do you want to kick us off, and then I'll go from there?
Sure. As Erin said, I am Megan Brunell, and I'm the Director of University and Special Events at the University of New Hampshire. We are a moderately large public institution. We're the flagship university in the state of New Hampshire. And I've been in my role for, almost 8 years now. And I have welcomed one new president in our time here. He's been here for almost 5 years. And I led that inauguration experience, which was the biggest learning curve probably of my career. So excited to talk about this with all of you.
Thanks, Megan. And as mentioned, I'm Sam Frost. I am currently the Assistant Vice President of Constituent Experiences, which is a fancy way of saying that I oversee central engagement, annual giving, events, and operations teams. And I've been with Ohio State for 10 years. And in that short decade, I have welcomed 2 presidents and watched 2 presidents leave. Actually 3 technically, if you count the interim that was in place when I got here. So we are currently without president, and I see a couple of my Ohio State colleagues on this call probably having the same fear of change feelings that I'm having right now, knowing we're about to go through this. So this is very timely for all of us, but I do look forward to sharing with you a few of the things that I've learned along the way. And also want to frame that certainly I'm coming from a very advancement focused lens, but we're going to do a little bit more than just talk about donors alums that could potentially also hit on what you'd be experiencing if you were in the other session. I can't speak for Megan because we have not yet presented together, but I am a very casual speaker. So if at any point you want to unmute and chime in and say something, you're not going to throw me off. If you want to throw something in the chat, like let's hit it as we go. We don't have much time together, but I look forward to hearing from you guys as well. Okay, so we're going to roll. Okay, so what we hope to accomplish and share with you in this session is really a few key tips that Megan and I have picked up along the way. So we just did our welcome. We hope to enforce and emphasize with you that it's important to do your homework before new president and spouse partner joins. And really that the key when you're thinking about introducing a new president to donor and alums, it's really about establishing goals and key agendas, because it can get real big real fast, regardless of the size of your institution. And it can and should feel oftentimes like, you really need to be intentional about where you spend your time, especially in those early months. Otherwise, you've got everyone from across campus coming and saying like, my audience is the key and needs to be in front of this person right away. And then we do want to leave some time to hear from you. So hopefully we will allow each of you to kind of chime in with your own experiences. Okay, so we were going to do a poll, but see earlier tech issues, we aren't doing it. We're going to do it the old fashioned way. So we're going to ask you to put in the chat, just so we have some sense of how this group is currently comprised. Have you welcomed a president in the last 12 months? If so, you can put 1 or just write that. Is your current president likely to depart in the next 12 months, or is neither of the above true for you? And that will just help Megan and I better understand where the audience is sitting. So again, which of these applies? Are you welcoming a new president maybe in the next 12 months? Or have you, welcomed a president in the next 2 months? Do you think you might have a current president departing, which would have you thinking ahead, or neither?
Seeing a lot of 1s in the chat.
Yeah, really, that's interesting. And I know we heard our friend Chrissy talking about that. So yeah, a lot of new presidents. So a lot of you have recently been through this, which makes me happy, because hopefully you'll have a lot to share with us when we get to that part. And then I'm going to take all the notes and learn from you guys, because we're about to be in that boat. So hopefully too, this is all about learning from each other. That's what UEvents has been since we started, right? So as you're seeing people who might be in similar institutions to you, putting a 1 in there and you're in a 2 spot, like, put that person's name down and reach out to them afterwards. I have found so much value in this group in the last few years we've been doing this. Okay, so tip number 1, again, do your homework. So I'm going to hit on a few of these. I'm going to pass to Megan, but we'll each be kind of interjecting with our experiences. So doing your homework about your incoming president, once that person is named, and their partner, can just help set you up for success in so many ways, right? So what can you learn about that person's preferences, whether that be around food or time spent or how they like to structure their day, right? What can you learn about their communication and work style? How does that person, are they, somebody that likes to text you in, at any moment? How do they like things to be really spelled out, or do they like to interpret, right? What kind of personality are you getting? I think all of us could tell lots and lots of stories over the course of this time together around personality, but also what are their strengths, right? What are you going to lean into, especially when it comes to your donors and alumni and having them connect with that person right away? And what expectations do they have? Like, I've already heard us talking about this a little bit. If they're coming in from a previous institution and says, like, this is how my ship ran, like, that's good for you to know, so that you can either onboard them a little bit to how your institution runs, or adjust your expectations. And I think Jen's comments about getting ready for change were so applicable here in terms of what your how you can be setting yourself up for success and preparing for that change. So my Ohio State colleagues that have been around a minute, who are on this call, can appreciate. I am coming off of an experience of welcoming 2 very different presidents over our last 2 leaders. And so Dr. Drake, who was our 2 presidents ago, had, when we were able to call and do some investigating on some of his preferences, we learned that he's kind of a quiet and maybe a shy guy, right? He didn't like this like super packed schedule of activities. He wanted a few deep connections each day that didn't start at 6 a.m. and went until 10 p.m. Very different from the next leader I encountered, who had a lot of energy, wanted to meet a lot of people, and to Dr. Drake's predecessor when we were coming off of, who was Dr. Gee. And if you know Jordan Gee, he's like bing, 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 bing all the time, right? So, so we had to adjust like the way we built schedules, the way we thought about introducing Dr. Drake to people. He also had a very strong partner, spouse, Brenda Drake, who were coming off of Dr. Gee, who did not have a partner at all for most of his tenure here. So all of a sudden it was like, what do you do with a first lady? And how does she want to, play in the space and be recognized as first lady? So those were, and also like very specific food and event experiences and expectations that she had. So all of that, like gaining that by calling the previous institutions and learning about that was like, we already had a whole sort of idea in mind on how we were going to move forward. This last president who just left us had a major gift officer for a spouse. So that changes my game in advancement, right? She knew a lot about my work and we had to really get ready for that. So Megan and I, as we were prepping for this, we're talking about the fact that I could call these previous institutions, get that download and be ready for what we were walking into. And I think back to the, how do you handle change and how much anxiety does that produce? It really did help to quell that quite a bit. Megan, you had a bit of a different experience there.
Yeah, we definitely did. Yeah. So we actually had zero contact with our president before he started. So I think our inauguration was held in early October. And I think we probably first met with him in early September. So we had about a month of time. And so obviously as event planners, we know we were not planning an inauguration in a month. So we had to hope that what we were coming up with was going to match his preferences. And luckily our president is fairly easygoing in a lot of those ways. And so with the exception of a few personal touches he wanted to make, we didn't have to change a whole lot of things. But a lot of what benefited us in those going into that conversation was being able to say, here's kind of the background about why we made this decision. Here's why we think the inauguration should run this way, or here's why we think you should meet with these people first, or whatever it was, and really making sure that we had looked into some of those kind of things. What had the university done in the past, which we'll talk about in just a second, but to make sure that we weren't walking into a situation where a month out, he might want to change absolutely everything we had already planned. So the benefit there definitely was that he was easygoing, but that meeting was very nerve-wracking until it was over. And we have the exact same experience as well on the spouse side. We went from having a spouse who was happy to be at certain things, but for the most part was very much like, I don't need to be there. You don't need to include me, to someone who loves hosting and loves being involved. And so that was really something that was unexpected for us and something we definitely had to learn to navigate. So I will say we keep learning as we go. 5 years later, we're still even learning new things about them both as we go. So if you can have Sam's situation where you can meet with them in advance, please take that opportunity. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and even like, as you learn those things, I think it helps with your key audiences when it comes to donors and alums, right? You can begin to see those connection points. And like, so when Megan and I were talking about, I did feel really fortunate in retrospect to say, like, we had a lot of time to think about what would be most impactful for the person too, which helps us tell the story about who they are as our president. So yeah, right. That was huge.
Definitely. And so then on to learning about, the university and past and present, and hopefully you're all really great about keeping records. I cannot say that we at UNH are the best at that. And so the very first month or two of planning was really spent trying to track down the information about what we had done in the past, because it just wasn't really well kept. And so we were looking at trying to even just what newspapers were reporting on and all of those kind of things, because we just didn't have access to the information. So really trying to look into what kind of traditions have been held in the past. Is there something that's going to be required at a ceremony or something? Is there an individual that's always the first person to meet them or things like that? And then also, what are going to be the expectations of both the university, the campus, the person, all of those kind of things. And so are people expecting a certain level of experience? Do you have a really formal experience that people are expecting? Or is it going to be more informal and those kind of things on that side? The one thing I really want to touch on, though, that really affected us was really paying attention to the current landscape of your university and all the constituencies. So we were at a time when we were inaugurating our current president. The university wasn't necessarily looked at super favorably across the state, and particularly on the press side of things. And so we were really conscious about making sure that whatever we chose to do was going to be looked at favorably, that there wasn't a way that the press could skew it, make us look bad, that we were being conscious of costs, that we were being conscious of who's being invited because they have a big role in the state or outside of the university. One thing that really affected us as well, on our last inauguration, we had someone who was looking for something much more extravagant. And so costs were a little bit higher than maybe we would like to admit. And we actually were ultimately subject to a right to know request. And so those costs ended up in the newspaper. And that was a lot of what people were talking about, as opposed to having a new president and what she was going to bring to the university. So just something to keep in mind as you're planning these different things is people who maybe aren't involved, what are they thinking about what you're doing, or what will they think? And really paying attention to that as you're planning.
I think that's key, because as I thought about introducing your president to donors and alums, it's not just introducing the person like one-to-one or even one-to-many. It's introducing them by way of a story that you're telling, right? And so if that story is wrapped with dispatch, for us, that's our major newspaper, articles about overspending, like that's not a good look, right? In the first months or so. At Ohio State, we're a little different. Our history is more rooted in investitures, which happen for us about a year into the person being here. And so rather than an inauguration that's sort of immediate, it gives us about a year, which again, back to sort of the incoming president, learning about them. It then gives you extra time to figure out this person's preferences, what they're coming from, what they're used to. And in our case, similarly, our last president was used to a little bit more extravagance than we're used to. So we had a lot of fun actually in the event space, thinking about how you can satisfy that need or want for extravagance, but do it by way of impactful storytelling or students, right? Because we were so conscious of like wanting to make sure the optics were right for this person. And I mean, we were coming out of some craziness with COVID and all these other things, right? So I have found that to be a great way to also help keep at bay some of my colleagues who are like, my audience needs, or my person needs to get in front of this person. You know, I have this sort of year-long runway to this big, launch, which is helpful and allows you to sort of stair step a little bit more the intros as you go, and the storytelling that leads to that moment that you need to be careful with in terms of optics. So here's a couple of pictures. I'll let Megan speak to hers first.
Sure. So I just chose two to kind of illustrate a few of the changes that were requested that were unexpected. And the top picture that I just thought was such a great idea, something that I think we might try and include again in the future, was he actually requested to do a regalia change during the ceremony. So he came in wearing the regalia from his alma mater and ultimately asked that he derobe and put on the regalia from UNH, in addition to receiving the medal and all of those kind of things, which I just thought was a really nice moment. And I think really helped him feel like a true member of the community by doing that. And then the other picture, which was just a fun picture of his family, that was a big piece for him, was to include his family as much as possible in the weekend. So his children served as the grand marshals of the homecoming parade with them, or his grandchildren, excuse me. And they were really just heavily involved in each of the events that we did. And so that wasn't necessarily something, our previous president didn't have as big of a family. And so it wasn't necessarily something we thought about as regularly, but made for a fun addition.
I like that first piece too, and in terms of, again, like the visual storytelling. For us, everything at Ohio State's about tradition, right? As true for many of you. So the top picture is Dr. Drake on his first day, and you know, is it even your first day at Ohio State if you don't have Brutus right behind you? Probably not. So this is us sort of like welcoming him, but you can kind of see representations of different constituencies even in the picture, right? We had to be really careful about, on day one, where are the right places for Dr. Drake to spend time and with whom when it comes to telling story. And then on the bottom is just an example of like the very traditional investiture that we do, and how, that is steeped in its own tradition and has all of its own, luckily, kind of pieces and parts that are already assembled for us to just kind of plug into. What we have finally gotten better at over the last 2 is putting standard operating procedures into place so that you can kind of say to the new president, like, this is really how this goes. And you can, of course, put your stamp on it. But we didn't really have, I think, not the investiture itself had some of that, but all of the things that go around it, we didn't have good standard procedure on who you invite and, who gets precedence over whom.
Great point.
Okay, so we're going to move into goals and audiences and determining tactics next.
Yeah, so what I love about these bullet points is I think they're obvious, but not necessarily things that come to mind right away. So when we were first talking about this, it was kind of like, yeah, that makes total sense, but maybe didn't always pop into our heads when we were going through some of these processes. So I think obviously, what are you trying to accomplish with these meetings? Is it about communicating, this is the new president, you're just here to meet them, that you're just here to get to know them, or is it a bigger conversation? Are they sharing goals? Have we kind of had a blend of both, where early on it was very much come and meet him, get to know him, he wants to learn from you, versus as we moved forward, it was he's ready to share his goals for the university, so come learn about those and meet him at the same time. When it comes to measuring success, I think everyone does this a little bit differently, and for us, we really just focused on a lot of the things that we've been doing all along. So how many people are we able to put in front of them? Are they showing up? Are they recommending you come to another event? All those traditional event success indicators were what we focused on. But I think there are definitely some other opportunities of feedback from the president themselves, so you can improve the next event and some of those kind of things. But the thing I think to focus on the most is really prioritizing your audience and determining, what is that timeline and who meets who when. And I think everyone has a different level of priority. For us, it was, our top boards, our foundation board, our alumni board. It was our top donors, all of those kind of people that, help the university move forward on a regular basis, that are going to both expect FaceTime early on and also do deserve it for the work that they do for us. And then moving out further, so then it's, some of our advisory boards, some of our donors who maybe need some stewardship or our mid-tier level. And then we start getting into our all-call events. We went for more of a traditional roadshow experience and brought him around the country to meet with our different alumni pockets, and then also use those experiences to get those one-on-one visits at the same time. So when he was in California, we didn't have to worry about some of those donors needing to travel to New Hampshire to meet with him or those kind of things, and really made sure we were taking advantage of those experiences. And then lastly, I think it's important as well to think about your on-campus community. So when is faculty meeting them? When is staff meeting them, students? And what is that experience? For us, it was really important to make sure that they each had their own time alone. So it wasn't faculty and staff together. It was faculty, it was staff separate, it was students separate, because they're each looking for a different experience. And for him, it was also wanting to give them a different experience. Wanting to engage with the faculty was a much more formal experience than, wanting to have ice cream and cookies with the students and come across as, the cool dude they can come hang out with when they want. So that was something we really had to think about as well, is that we had an inauguration weekend. And so it was about trying to make best use of that time so that we could really fit in those different priorities and different tactics for those different groups. What did you guys do, Sam?
So I think, to your point, this is pretty, common sense, right, for us event planners. But I think what I've really enjoyed about this community of other folks who do this work in a higher ed setting, all of us event people, is that oftentimes we do have to be the catalyst for sort of good decision making when people come forward and everything sounds like a good event, right? It's like, this could be an event, that could be an event. And oftentimes our job is to sort of help distill and facilitate what is the right framework to move forward. And so that's kind of, when we were having this conversation, what I really appreciated is this gets you to what's most efficient and effective, right? And helps to kind of create a matrix that you can use when you're talking with your partners who are, again, all sort of clamoring for my audience should be first. So being diligent and sitting down and creating for yourself, what do we hope to accomplish? How are we going to measure that success? Who are those priority audiences? And I 100% agree with Megan's sort of like start in the middle with the sort of most engaged and kind of move out. But also your environment might change, like the way you think about that too. So for us, with Dr. Johnson starting in the middle of COVID, that actually had us sort of root to campus a little bit more because she was in a bit of a bubble, and have to do a lot of things by Zoom, right? So there to that change environment. Here's a few picks if Megan wants to.
Oh, yes, thank you. So this is kind of a review of a few different things we did. So as I mentioned, we had kind of both levels of here's an opportunity to just come and meet him very early on. And then it really led into more opportunities for him to kind of share his vision for the future. And also we were thinking about going back to kind of our earlier point is when should the spouse be involved? And so this kind of middle picture here where they're receiving the photo of the birds, that was taken in Florida. And as I'm assuming is true for a lot of other institutions, our Florida group is a specific type of population, usually our older alumni. And that just felt like a really great fit for her. She was very excited about meeting them. They were very excited about meeting her. And so that was an event we had prioritized that she would actually travel with us to these alumni events. And they, as you can see, welcomed her as well as him with open arms, sharing, giving them a photo to hang on their wall. And then we did transition into these more president-centered events. So whether it was featuring him as kind of our welcome speaker at some of our events, as that bottom picture shows, he welcomed the community and introduced our keynote speaker for that event. But then we also featured him as the speaker himself. So he served on a panel about leadership with our network in DC, because that's what his research has been focused on. And so we made sure that we weren't just kind of putting him on display, but also giving him the opportunity to share what he was most passionate about beyond just, UNH is going to be a top 25 institution and all of those kind of goals that he had. So.
Okay, so switching gears a little bit, this is something I wanted to share that will be in the deck that you guys will receive afterwards. This again was born out of a COVID timeframe. So I think we actually, as we are thinking about this next president, might adjust this slightly. But this was something that our advancement communications team, our events teams, our donor experience teams, our alumni relations teams kind of all came together like the true advancement model and kind of said, what really are we, what do we think success looks like? What do we hope our constituents sort of do, see, and feel, and then what does that actually translate to the activities that the president's involved with, right? So your institution likely would do this differently, but I present this as kind of an opportunity for you to kind of think about how you set the stage, and many of you just went through this, so I'm guessing you might have even better renditions of this that I want to steal from you, but if this is at all helpful, I think this allowed us to kind of gain agreement on things as all of the key sort of representation of areas amongst advancement. And then it made my job a lot easier in saying like, hey, we said that we're not doing that until like 6 to 12 months. So, I appreciate that you want to get this person in front of, this group, but we're gonna stick to the plan, and we're gonna stick to what we said was how we want constituents to sort of become exposed. And so any kind of tool that you can create for yourself that's like this, I think is huge. And here's just a few examples of similar to Megan's sort of how we've handled the first few days. And in this case of Dr. Johnson, who's the woman on the right, the bottom right picture of her having the full Buckeye experience couldn't come until after COVID. So up top left is Dr. Drake with mayor and sort of key constituents. But then in the bottom, what I appreciated about him is he was very much about affordability access from the very beginning. He made it very clear he wanted that to be his message. So back to that earlier slide of the 0 to 3 months, how do you want constituents to view this person? He wanted that to be key for him right off the bat. So he went into the community and we sort of announced something literally on day one, which of course was already in the works, but it helpful that it would align with what he was passionate about. And then top right, Dr. Johnson on Zoom, because that's all we could do. And then masked, again, all part of the storytelling, right? Like we had to tell the story of her being in front of the right people, but do that in an appropriate, safe way. Okay, now I feel like we have like hardly any time because I always talk about. But I just wanted to kind of open the floor up real quick. Do we have 1 minute or do we have 6 minutes, Erin?
We have 1 minute. I think we'll
Okay.
get called back in a minute or two.
Okay, sorry. So I know we wanted to hear from you. If we can't do it today, I really do hope you guys will feel like you can communicate with Megan and I. You'll certainly get our contact information, but so many of you have already been through this recently, and I'd love to learn from you and hope this was helpful to you.
Say, feel free to continue conversation, folks, until we get called back if you want to chat through anything.
Yeah. Anybody have any immediate reactions or cool things that have happened in your campuses?
I'll just say from us at Barnard, we just got a new president last month. So actually this is like perfect timing to see sort of your timeline was really helpful and interesting. And I like loved, Megan, your changing regalia. Like that's such a cool visual. So, I mean, for us, there are a couple of us in this room, very helpful because we're like practically day one. So, I mean, not really, day 30 or whatever.
But it feels like day one. Ooh, now I'm going to be following Barnard. I can't wait.
Yeah.
All right. I think we're going back in like 8 seconds. Thanks, y'all. Appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Are Katie and Annie in here?
Yep, Annie is.
Oh, perfect. Okay. I was giving it a couple minutes, but I'll get started. Welcome to the Sharing the Goals and Vision of the New President Through Events and Other Engagement session. I'm Erin Dolsky from the University of Michigan, and I will be the breakout facilitator. I will be watching the chat room and ensuring we stay on time. I now would like to introduce our speakers. We have Annie Bogger, the Director of Donor Engagement and Events at the University of Nebraska, and then Katie Jessic, Director of Events at the Iowa State University Foundation. And apologies in advance if I said your last names incorrectly. Please feel free to correct me. Enjoy, everyone.
Not a problem. Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. Katie Giesky. It's okay. I get that a lot. I am Director of Events at Iowa State University. I'm going to start off our session today, and then Annie's going to go next, and then we'll do a Q&A at the end, but feel free to kind of add things in the chat if you'd like to along the way. So I'm going to share my screen quick. All right, so today I'm going to be talking about how we at Iowa State University engaged our new university president in events. So let's go next slide. Okay. We haven't had a new university president since 2017, but I have been here at Iowa State for 11 years, here at the foundation for 6. So I started here at the foundation and at the events team right at the time that we were going from an interim president to our new president. So this is Dr. Wendy Winterstein. She's our 16th president at Iowa State. She's our first female president. She has long history at Iowa State. She's been here for 40 years, has her graduate degree here, and is the former dean of the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. So Wendy came in with a ton of knowledge and information about Iowa State, which is a little bit different from our former president. So it was a big transition for us. Our former president came from out of state with no ties to the state of Iowa or our university. Not a ton of goals, not a huge vision. The number one thing that he was really focused on was campus beautification. Our campus was already beautiful, but he didn't have a ton of input on events, and left abruptly after 5 years amid some scandals, including crash landing the university plane. Luckily, Wendy is not interested in flying our plane. So transitioning into President Winterstein was very, very different. She has a ton of connections to the university, our top donors, state officials. She had a huge list of priorities and ideas and wanted to be very, very involved in events, especially programs and topics that we're going to be presenting on and that sort of thing. So it took a little while to figure out how we were going to kind of make this transition. Originally, with our former president, we didn't have much involvement with him or his communications team when putting together programs and that sort of thing. New president wanted to be a part of that whole process. So we started putting together event proposals instead of just running it past the president's office to get approval for regional locations and venues and that sort of thing. We are now putting together very in detailed event proposals. So everything from the program to the event flow. Now we call them a 4-pager. It's 4 pages of information that gets proposed to them, no longer just the location. The program topics and themes, we're actually working very, very closely with the president's and her communications team to put those together. So we often meet for our signature events months and months and months prior, if not almost a year prior, to kind of discuss with them what are topics and themes that they want us to put together in our event programs to share with our donors and alumni. The event prep that we do also changed quite a bit. So we are, for an event like our Order of the Knoll, which is our largest donor recognition event, we are putting together these proposals, the initial proposals, 8 to 10 months prior, after meeting with them about topics and themes for the program. So that is that kind of 4-pager that I discussed at the beginning. The program is then reviewed by the president, the speaking points that are done by our communications team here at the foundation about a month prior, so that we can make any adjustments that we need. We've been doing walkthroughs, usually the week of. So that's everything from going to the venue, and if it's here on campus, and walking through the venue so that they know we're going to start in this room and then we're going to go to this room and that sort of thing. We also do a script walkthrough at that point as well. And then the day of, we're doing script program run through. We have found that the more we are having her and her team involved and the more prep we are doing, surprise, surprise, the more comfortable she is the day of. So we haven't had too many issues when it's time for the event. She feels completely prepped and everything is pretty smooth. The other thing that we've kind of made a huge shift in is including our president's spouse. So our president's spouse, Robert, is very interested in being a part of the whole planning process of events as well. So wants to provide input and feedback after events. And so that's something that we've really tried to include kind of in our process to make sure that he feels a part of this, as him and his wife are hosts of many of our events. So that, you know, if we want Robert to be on the same page as us. So we're all kind of working together with that. So the types of events that we do, that we're able to work with our president's office and so that we can share her goals and priorities. We've got our signature events that we do every year. So the Order of the Knoll reception is the largest donor reception that we do every year. We've got about 500 people or so who attend in person. We host that once a year on campus, and that's for people who are in our Order of the Knoll Giving Society. So our most important donors to the university attend that event. That's the one that we're spending almost a year working on. Pretty much the moment we're done in October, we usually start a couple weeks later thinking about the next year. We do annual regional events as well, as has been mentioned already today, that we are in Florida every year. We are in Arizona. when you live in Iowa, you usually want to get out in the winter. So it's nice to go to Florida and Arizona. We also have some Midwestern cities that we attend and have events there. We also have a yearly Distinguished Awards ceremony and dinner. So those are kind of our signature events that we are working with our president's office to put together those programs. But one thing that we know that our president and her husband really love is kind of the special touches that we can add into events. So these unique event opportunities, I have a few examples here. We are doing a dedication for a feed mill complex. We did the groundbreaking a number of years ago. I want to say it was 2018. It feels like forever ago. But we are about to dedicate the facility here this fall. And a couple of weeks ago, we brought the Kent Corporation and the leader of all of the top leaders of that organization to campus. It was a very small group. There are lead donors on this project, and we wanted to provide kind of a special event just for them ahead of the dedication, because we're expecting 300 plus potentially people at the dedication. So we did a very small dinner with the president and her husband and the dean of the college at the president's home. And then we did a lighting ceremony. So we have very, very large signage that is on the side of the buildings, and they did a whole lighting ceremony with a toast, and we flipped the switch and lit the building up. So that's kind of one really special example that something like that isn't something that we can provide to all donors or all attendees of our events, but we want to do something a little unique and special for them. The Turkelson Industrial Engineering groundbreaking is an event that we did this past fall, so about a year ago. We had the Turkelson family, who have not been super engaged at the university, but were the lead donors of this project. And we hadn't had them back onto campus for many, many years. And when they came back, one of those kind of special touches that we provided to that event is we had the shovels for the groundbreaking made from the chrome that the lead donors own a company that specializes in chrome. And so we secretly had the shovels made from their company. And it was a complete surprise to them. And they were, I think, about 50 pounds each. So that was kind of a fun little thing that we were able to do. Student Innovation Center is another facility that we dedicated on campus, and supposed to be in 2020, ended up having to kind of pivot, of course, and do the dedication in fall of 2021. We tried to tie in things that are housed there in the Student Innovation Center into the dedication. So we had the ribbon for the big ribbon cutting created in our textiles lab. And then the Ryman Gardens Sycamore Falls dedication is a new section of a garden that's on campus, and the Ryman family came back, and it was really fun. Lots of special touches at that event. We had a small private lunch, and the centerpieces were all made of flowers that had been collected at the gardens and put together by the staff there at the gardens. Food was garnished by herbs from the garden in the new section, Sycamore Falls. And even all of our desserts and some of our food was floral themed. So lots of kind of little special, unique touches. That's something that our university president's husband in particular really looks for and wants us to be able to provide that. And then some engagement opportunities that we've been able to do that helped her really share her priorities were the Faces of Iowa State was a traveling artist gallery, and it was paintings, portraits of Iowa State students, alumni, leadership. So we did a whole tour around Iowa as the artist tour moved. We did a little reception, and so she was able to do answer questions and do meet and greets and that sort of thing at that. We also try to plan in VIP meetings and receptions with our top donors prior to events, knowing that sometimes we have 150, 200, upwards of 500 people in the room. We want to make sure that she's able to meet with them. And so sometimes we do these private little receptions just for our top tier donors to meet with her to kind of kick off the evening. We also have still been doing a lot of virtual events. Unfortunately, I really love being able to just do in-person events, but we've found that being able to host virtual events, especially with our board of directors and other volunteers and our top donors, has really been impactful because we can't always bring everybody together as often as we want to. So we recently had a large virtual meeting with our foundation governors, who are volunteers and committee members, and our board, with our athletics director and our university president. That was a topic that they wanted to hear about. What are some changes? What's going on with the Big 12 and NIL and things like that. So we're able to still host those kind of virtual meetings to provide a little bit more opportunity for her with some of these donors. So I have a few photos here. The far photo that's our Order of the Knoll event. This past year, we hosted it at our student union we have 3 ballrooms in the student union. And so this space was for our program. And then we completely flipped the space into a reception while they were all in the food lines. That's the first time we've been able to host the event at that location. And it was quite an undertaking because we'd previously been in a very, very large venue. And so this year we had to kind of rethink everything. And our Memorial Union is really, really a beautiful space. So it was pretty fun to have that on campus. And then the other photos are from some of the other events that I just previously mentioned. So the top photo with the shovels, the 2 in the middle, those are the shovels that were created at the our lead donors company. So it's their chrome. And then the bottom photo, that is the lighting ceremony. So this group, very small group, came in, and this was right after they had a toast, and they switched the lights on. And although it was just a handful of people there, it was super exciting. And there were cheers and there was clapping, and we had a photographer, we had a videographer, we had a drone flying over. So we were able to put together a pretty cool package of photos and videos that we're going to be able to share with them after the dedication. So that's just a few examples that I have, and I'm gonna, I do have my email on here if anybody wants to reach me, but I'm gonna kick it over to Annie.
Hello, let me get my screen. Can you all see it working? Okay, awesome. Well, thank you, Katie. And I am Annie Boger. I am the Director of Donor Engagement and Events at the University of Nebraska Foundation. And I am going to talk, our president has not been here for as long as Katie has. Ours is new. So we got a new university president on January 1st of 2020. And I don't know if anybody else remembers any other significant events that happened in 2020. But we sure do. Because by March, we had a new challenge. So it was not only we had a new president, but we needed to introduce him to our entire university community of foundation donors and supporters, but we couldn't do it in person anymore. And at that point, he was really preoccupied with trying to figure out how to deal with COVID-19, keep a university functioning, safe and open. And that was his main goal. And a lot of this was a way our donors and supporters were the first time hearing from him. When he was selected as our priority candidate, that was in the fall. So he was able to do some, we'll call it Tour de Nebraska events, but not everybody got to meet him and his wife. So let me introduce you first to our president. His name is Ted Carter. He is the president of the University of Nebraska system, and he oversees our 4 universities, which is the University of Nebraska Lincoln, which I know many of you know, as well as University of Nebraska at Kearney, University of Nebraska Omaha, and the University of Nebraska Medical Center. So he is our system president, and he oversees 4 chancellors and then all of those campuses. So talk about getting thrown to the wolves at a time when we all couldn't even get together and meet with him. So I work for the foundation, and he has his own staff that works in Central, 2 of whom who are on this call today. And so they do a lot of events for him and his office, dealing with a whole multitude of things. So we work really closely with them. So when I'm talking about a lot of this stuff, some things interweave with activities that they do. And some things he comes to, quote unquote, our events. And some things we work on together. So we have that wonderful partnership with his office as well. But who is Ted Carter? So I'm kind of going to read this to you. It's our entertaining facts. But before President Carter came to the University of Nebraska, he was a superintendent of the U.S. Naval, oopsies, I got too excited, Academy in Annapolis, Maryland from 2014 to 2019. So he was the longest continually serving superintendent in Annapolis. He is a Distinguished Flying Cross and Bronze Star recipient. And he graduated from the Navy Fighter Weapons School, also known as Top Gun, in Miramar, California. He was commander for the Carrier Strike Group 12, which he commanded 20 ships to nuclear power aircraft carriers and 2 carrier air wings that were deployed in Afghanistan and the Arabian Gulf. He's a naval flight officer of more than 6,300 flying hours and has completed 2,016 carrier arrested landings, which is an American record. And last but not least, he hosted Tom Cruise on his first day of arrival at Miramar, and when he started his training for flights and for the Top Gun movie. So there's our fun fact about President Carter. If you Google him, you can watch many an interview where he talks about hosting Tom Cruise, if you are very interested in learning more about that experience. But we had this president had no relations to Nebraska. Our previous president did. So we kind of flipped from what Katie had. We had a president who was a Nebraska native and had ties here, and then we now have President Carter, who had never been to Nebraska. So we not only had to introduce him, but he had never been here, didn't know Nebraska. But when he first started, he kind of outlined his 5-year plan, which a lot of, all important that I think a lot of presidents have similar things, but I'm going to kind of go over them a little bit as they pertain to Nebraska. For the University of Nebraska system as a whole, he was he felt very strong about growing enrollment, particularly out-of-state enrollment, to create the Nebraska brain gain instead of brain drain. He wanted to really meet the healthcare needs in rural Nebraska. As many as you may know, Nebraska is a state where we have 2 highly populated cities on the eastern side of our state, and then the rest of our state is much more rural. He wanted to improve retention and graduation rates and really focus on a 4-year undergraduate degree graduation rate. He really wanted to improve diversity and inclusion, both among the student body, faculty, and staff. It was important to him about elevating the impact and that reputation of NU's research. We have had for so long such a great reputation in our research and what we do with the Med Center and across all of our 3 undergraduate campuses, and he really wanted to keep that going and build upon that. And he felt it was important. He understood the outreach and community engagement and understanding that the university is not just in the eastern part of the state. So for a person who had never been here, understanding that was huge, and embracing that is a big thing. He really wanted to address the gap in salaries so the university can compete and retain top talent. in faculty and staff. And he wanted to improve sustainability and reducing energy usage and costs. So this is his 5-year plan. We're not even through 5 years yet. So obviously things fluctuate and change as it goes, but a lot of these things we still hear him talk about. But this was his message when he first started, and a message that we had to help figure out, how do we get this to our donors when he's also only talking about COVID. So during COVID, what did we do? What we did is the president's office and our counterparts there, they were spending their time helping him get his message out, talking about how the university was reacting to the COVID-19 pandemic, what they were doing, how they were keeping school open. What we did on the heels of their actions, was we took a lot of his public speeches, whether he was on the news station, he was on our public radios, podcasts, anything we could find, and we shared that out to our donors and supporters. Because a lot of the times, this was the only way that they could hear his message and just hear him talk, figure out who he was and what he had to say. And then we also created a lot of virtual programming, as I know all of you did, and we've all talked about, but we did it too. We set up special Zoom messages, video messages for large groups, small groups, to start those personal connections when we were able to. Since they couldn't gather in person, we tried to create opportunities for him to start talking to some of those people that we wanted him to start a relationship with, so that when we ever came out of the pandemic, he could kind of hit the ground running and we weren't starting totally over. We also, in the midst of this, as you all did too, had a lot of large events going on. We had some big building openings that were happening, and we had to, which is one of the bottom picture, we had a huge opening for something called the Davis Global Center, which is actually the epicenter, that is a giant building that studied pandemics and was prepared to train our medical students and faculty and staff on treating a pandemic. So it was really apropos that it opened during the pandemic. So you'll see we had to do everything virtually, and we had to create a lot of messaging where we could film his remarks and put them into something and then virtually get it out to people. So after that, getting his message across, once we went into in-person, we basically had to reintroduce him again because we didn't know who had or hadn't heard his message. You know who you'd set up special meetings with and whatnot, but to your larger group of donors, supporters, how long had they listened to his message? What had they heard? How had they heard the messaging? What had they been a part of? We didn't know. So we basically had to reintroduce him in person. He had to retell his story all over again and again and again and again. And it's kind of like we did a second Welcome to the University of Nebraska tour to get him all over again and get him sharing the message again. So once we came out and we were allowed to gather, we had events that were naturally ones that always occurred. We have our pre-games before our Husker home football games. We had him at signature events for the foundation, which is, we all talked about our winter events when we travel to the warm tropic climates of Scottsdale and Palm Springs, or we have our annual meeting of trustees for the foundation. He was having private donor lunches or meetings at the president's home or offsite, depending on people's still comfort level with COVID. Sometimes they would meet outside, they'd sit far apart. He would do whatever he needed to do to meet people and to make them feel comfortable in 2021 and on. And then we had more gift celebrations that we kind of held off on, or that were able to happen right after COVID. That's one of our College of Engineering groundbreaking that we could do right after COVID was over. So it could be in person and it could happen. It was outside. It was wonderful. But we were able to kind of figure out timing on things. And he just kind of did a song and dance. Well, he obviously is still doing a lot of things president related, and has his own set of events team where they're doing things with him as well. So overall for us, it was a lot of planning, as you all know. It was a lot of duplicating efforts, because it allowed us to ensure that our new president met the donors, the people that we needed to, and made sure that they heard his story, or they had reheard his story, or they were able to share their questions, ask concerns. And maybe it wasn't about COVID, maybe it was just about him in general, because they didn't get to know him for the first, year and a half that he was here, because we were not together. So this was our challenge, and then always trying to keep his messaging fresh and up to date, even still 3 years into the job. He sometimes even will go back to start talking about reintroducing himself, because he's still meeting people that he's never met before. And he's been here for 3 years. So, when we all joke about the COVID years and they don't count, but they also count, because you're trying to figure out, do I know you? Have I met you? Have we taken you here? What have you seen? What do you know? What don't you know? Because you take out that in-person experience, and it was a fun, challenging time for all of us. So that's mine in a nutshell on how we brought President Ted Carter into the fold at the University of Nebraska. And if you were interested in listening to any of his experiences about Top Gun, you feel free to Google his name and you can watch the videos. So I think now we have Q&A, maybe, Erin?
Yeah, please feel free if anybody has any questions to shout them out or put them in the chat.
I'm gonna give everybody just a second to hop back on. Okay, well, we'll get started. So I hope everybody enjoyed the break and had a little opportunity to either get a beverage or check some emails. And Anne, I think we can go ahead and share the poll results. So we'll take a look here. It says, did your institution plan farewell events for your outgoing president? It looks like half of you did and half of you didn't, which is interesting. I would imagine for those who did not, it might have been an unexpected exit and not something that you necessarily want to celebrate or draw attention to, or the outgoing president and partner or spouse just wanted to quietly exit, which I think a lot of us can respect. Who was invited to the farewell events? It was a pretty even distribution here. And it looks like the group that was involved or invited the least was probably alumni. But it looks, like I said, like pretty evenly distributed, and just depends on, probably the outgoing president and who they actually wanted in the room to say farewell to. How are president's goals and visions for the institution communicated at events? Looks like everybody, or a large majority, said targeted messaging and scripting and visuals, which isn't a surprise. And I'm curious, how many institutions are doing printed materials and distributing that at events, because I know a lot of universities, and including ours, were very conscious about sustainability and using funds to print things, and then they're just left on tables.
It is my privilege today to share some insights with you about my team's experiences with the grand challenges of installing a president during a pandemic. So first off, let me just say that it's my sincere hope that none of us never have to do that themselves in the future. But there are some universal truths I can take from an experience like this to share with others, not related to a year during a pandemic, that you can apply to events in completely normal years. And they're perhaps ones we don't even internalize or place at the center of our event planning as often as we may think. The first is that chaos begets order, assuming that the second is also true, which is that you have a clearly defined purpose or set of values to tie you to your successful outcome. We've all heard it said that moments of discomfort are also opportunities for growth, and UMD's recent presidential inauguration is proof of this. In order for us to understand the kind of celebration that would be appropriate for our president in normal circumstances, it's important for you to first know who he is. For starters, President Hines is a historic president to the University of Maryland for more than a few reasons. In addition to being the 34th president, he's also the first Black president of the university. His first days as president were during the summer of 2020, during a historic time of twin pandemics, that of COVID-19 and the other of systemic racism. These grand challenges informed a lot of President Hines' vision for the start of his presidency. He's also a fantastic ambassador of UMD itself. Speaking academically, he was the dean of our School of Engineering. He was and still is a professor at the university, and in a subject like engineering, that obviously indicates he's very smart. He's also a parent of 2 Terps. And you may think, based on some preconceptions, someone as devoted to academia as this might be a little more introverted and quieter, but you would be dead wrong. He is charismatic, friendly, personable, genuine. He knows something about everything. Like, he can engage you on all topics, sports, music, you name it. And speaking of being genuine, he once ended a family vacation early so he could rush to a football game where an important donor showed up unannounced, and he personally wanted to greet them and ensure they had a fantastic experience. He's also an expert advancement professional and fundraiser. Specifically, he was the broker of the university's single largest donation in its history, a whopping $125 million commitment to support our STEM programs. In summary, he's just a really, really, really busy guy. So you can understand that an inauguration for a person like this deservedly needs to be big. But what happens when a celebration for a person with so many big ideas and values, who is an unstoppable force like Dr. Pines, meets the world-stopping force of a pandemic like COVID? So first, let's look at our quote-unquote inauguration timeline. You can see here that between the day of our press release or press announcement for President Pines as the next president and our actual inauguration, 14 months have passed. And his first day of his presidency came very early on in those 14 months. So in light of that, the inauguration and onboarding were actually inverted, because President Pines needed to do something during all that time when we were not able to meet because of COVID. So he hits the ground running in July 2020 by announcing 3 themes to guide our school's mission and multiple immediate actions in the spirit of those themes. The first was improving the student experience, which emphasized concrete initiatives like increasing staff for mental health support, and increasing student support for those who are having financial hardship. The second was creating an inclusive environment, which emphasized initiatives like enhancing diversity, equity, and inclusion in the curriculum itself, and promoting voter registration and turnout on election day. The last and third was advancing the university itself, which emphasized initiatives like advancing student, faculty, and staff diversity and launching research fellows programs on campus. The 3 themes were effective because they represented experiences that impacted everyone on campus, so an individual could draw inspiration for their own work from them. Then, by immediately leading by example with these concrete actions that tackled the immediate grand challenges on campus, it was also affirming as it was inspiring, because it was proof our new leader meant business. Even though we couldn't meet in person, President Pines' charismatic presence on campus never suffered, because he and his administration were intentional and deliberate during this onboarding. Not 1 second was wasted. So by the time we finally reach our inauguration week in April of 2021, what these first day initiatives have done is given us a thoughtful, concise, and assuring vision for UMD's future during an uncertain and frankly scary time. And 2, they also made it clear what the substance of the inauguration needed to be and what the celebration needed to look like and be about. So President Pines knew that a party for himself actually needed to be a party for everyone, one that championed the things that had made, were making, and would make the university a leader in higher education, far beyond just this 1 week. So he began with the Grand Challenges panel with university leaders in the arts and humanities. It was a thoughtful conversation linking these topics to society's most pressing issues and showcasing UMD's role in addressing them creatively. Following that, he highlighted an artist at UMD, or former artist rather, David Driscoll, whose art he featured extensively on campus throughout the year, and whose art also formed the basis of the branding for our inaugural events, which you'll see on the next slide. He also had a parade, which I'll save for the next slide when I can show you the excitement of that with a little more context. He even found time to feature a celebration of the university's homegrown innovators, entrepreneurs, and creatives with the Innovate Maryland event, a signature event recognizing the transformational impact made by faculty, students, and alumni. So do you see this theme of championing other people with his time in the spotlight? It's pretty cool. And lastly, when all that's said and done, you have the installation ceremony itself and the quote unquote remix celebration, which for all intents and purposes was the after party, which I'll also discuss in a moment as well. So here you can see Pines on Parade, where the president took nearly 1,000 photographs of all these people who came out to meet him in person at 3 places strategically on campus. He got to dance with everyone, lead the band, showcase his dog even. His dog Rocky got to come out and meet people. And he debuted an ice cream flavor, which is impressive because he hates ice cream. That's how much he cares about other people's experiences at his event, that he brought ice cream. And you can just see like how excited he is to meet people in person after not getting that in-person interaction because of COVID. National tours would come later in terms of his ability to meet with people on the other side of the country, but yeah, that's just a glimpse of what would come in all of his in-person interactions. And here you can see the installation ceremony itself, where we obviously have social distancing. The branding I alluded to from the artist, and you see we have 2 twin podiums, so that way we could alternate speakers more easily and readily without disrupting the program. And on this last slide, you can see yet another list of initiatives that were debuted in the remarks of the installation ceremony. I like to joke that President Pines loves his lists of action items. But at the same time, these numbered lists of grand challenges to tackle and how to tackle them are inspiring demonstrations because they're really tangible ways of enacting change in the world, globally and locally at UMD. And if you're a stakeholder in the university, hearing these words and seeing new lists of things to accomplish on top of your already existing lists, that probably makes you feel confidence in what your university is doing. You know, the inauguration was on its surface a party, but it was also the university doubling down on that vision from the first days of his presidency. So really setting a path forward for our university's overall strategic plan after the inauguration. So this brings you to our takeaways. My first is that you embrace the chaos. Inconveniences can still lead to purposeful silver linings. Not being able to meet in person was obviously a disadvantage for the first year, but it also made the inauguration an even more celebratory occasion. A new presidency plus the catharsis of returning to being in person, plus a celebration of all these concrete successes in the first year of his presidency, all were enhanced by this delay, actually. It offered us a valuable opportunity to be deliberate, intentional, and thoughtful around the events of the programming and that we were able to produce for the inauguration. And second, know your purpose. One-time events will always have lasting implications. So the event wasn't just about a ceremonial change of command. The purpose of this event was not just a meet and greet for a new president. It was ultimately a launching starting point for our transformative initiatives for the university and our strategic plan, along with a display of institutional strength, you know, to give all of our stakeholders pride and confidence in where the university stands. Case in point, our Fearlessly Forward strategic plan is just kicking into action and it's still going strong. So that wraps up my slides. I thank you for giving me this time. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me and Lindsay, and we'll also jump in for a Q&A at the end of the session.
Thank you, Mark. I'm so glad that we were able to get you that screen sharing.
Thank you.
And we'll head it over to you. And you're on mute still.
Hello, everyone. Sorry about that. Okay, so I am Ann Wilczek. I am the Director of Events at the University of Minnesota Foundation. And so I'm just going to share our inaugural story with you and some of our key takeaways as well. So actually, we have planned several inaugurations, not necessarily by choice, but just within our planning process. So here we go. In January 2019, we started planning our inauguration for our soon-to-be first woman president, Joan Gable. This was super exciting. Great energy on campus. I think it was just the right time, the right momentum. pre-COVID, everything felt really great. So in order to do this, there were a ton of meetings taking place. We went to the ground running with a great team here at the U. And I had regular meetings and discussions with her and her team just to kind of get to know like what they want. But really, I took a look at what had we done? What are traditions that are important to our university, and how are we going to leverage and do that, right? So at this point in time, we're planning the program. We are working with the School of Music to identify who we're featuring. We're working on guest lists, regalia, delegation, all of the things that we all know come with this traditional experience. And then we had to pivot. So it was in May, and I'll never forget this day. I think there was a team of about 15 people in our boardroom assembling the invites about to go. And I got a phone call. Can you come to the president's office? We need to talk to you. And got the note of, you know, things are looking great. Everything is wonderful, but she's had a change of heart and it doesn't feel like the right vibe. And the message and the tone that she wants to start off her presidency with. Okay, let that soak in. We've had conversations. How's that going to go? And I think this goes right back to what our speaker was talking about. How do you embrace that change? So I asked the questions, you know, what are we looking for then? Once I finished that conversation, went back to the boardroom. Hey team, thank you. We can stop. We're going to scratch this whole plan, and we're going to have a new plan come Monday. So have a great weekend. And then you took the weekend to think. So some of the things that we were hearing from her and just kind of what felt right and what didn't feel right is that tradition that was what we thought was important had changed, and it was part of the climate and part of our environment. And she wanted this to be an experience that is inclusive for all, and had a different energy, and also was very mindful of university spending, which I will say the first plan was not extravagant, but still that was an important key takeaway. So our new plan, we took the installation or induction ceremony and had it be a more private event. This was held in our boardroom for our regents. And what we did was and this is pre-COVID, so at this time it felt really cool to be able to live stream everywhere. Now it probably wouldn't be as cool, but we set up viewing parties across campus and allowed for people to see this, and yet gave her the opportunity, as she is a more private person, to have this with a smaller group of folks. So this is where the governor does the declaration and all of that piece starts to go. So that was step one. Step two, we also had a campus parade. It was called a celebratory walk because we didn't have a president that started with a P, so we went that way. And what we did was we really wanted this to be an opportunity for everyone. So she didn't want the regalia of faculty walking down. She wanted this to feel like everyone was part of it. So we went to work doing that. And what we did then is have her give her actual inaugural address in a very public place on our university for everyone. So what was super cool is, as you can see, we had a great turnout. People came out, people were there to celebrate. And we surprised everyone by having 300 marching band students, as soon as she was done, come rushing down those stairs and started playing our rouser. It was a really fun experience and something that I think was very touching. Following that, we have the campus celebration. So now this is replacing all of those fancy dinners, right? We served corn on the cob and chili and apples, and we invited all the different student groups to set up on the lawn and showcase their stuff. And this was really also to provide an opportunity not just to welcome the president, but welcome the community. So there were press there. There were other people learning and seeing these really cool initiatives and the great work that is happening at the university, all while celebrating our president. So it was a great vibe. I will show you just a quick little video here of the recap of that day.
I see this emerging story as a chapter in a book, and our university's story advances. For before us today are a new generation of problems to solve, leaders to cultivate, outreach and service to extend, and discoveries to achieve.
Hi, nice to see you.
We must embrace this unfinished business, and we must live up to the calling we share, knowing that the most important tasks of our university are done by everyone. I'm filled with optimism when I think of leading the University of Minnesota into this important next chapter. Now let's get started.
Okay, so that was our day in a 50-second nutshell, what we had. So we also had a week of events leading up to inauguration. So, and I will also note we have 5 system campuses here at the University of Minnesota. So those experiences also took place on all 5 campuses, not necessarily that week or that same day, because we wanted to get her out on that road, visiting and welcoming folks across the state. So just talking about this coming week. So what we did was we assigned an event manager to each of these days. And then we started collaborating with this awesome university and pulling out some of these themes. So we involved different communicators through these different areas to create these experiences. You'll see here on them that they varied. So we had her out on the water. We had her in different labs. We had her learning how to work a carp cannon. And I can't tell you about that, but somebody I'm sure can. So we really took the opportunity to immerse this here. One of the other opportunities we had in here was to really partner with our communities. So some of the photos you are not seeing is we partnered with Minnesota Public Radio, who was able to take her platform, which was around mental health as well, and do a panel there and really focus. So we took this opportunity to not only involve our faculty and staff, but we brought in the media, we brought in people and took this as our momentum to get our name out there and share those stories for the entire week, which went really well. So if I'm thinking about onboarding and I'm thinking about what does this mean, I think first of all, know who your people are, right? Your president, whether they're coming in with people or they have existing people, understand and develop those relationships with their chief of staff, with their speechwriter, their spouse, if they're involved, that needs to be a team. That network is what's going to make all of us successful. Next, know what their message is. So in thinking about this, what do they want to communicate? Not just now, but in 30, 60, 90 days, because that's the momentum. And that's what you get to work with as an event producer to really help launch what you're going to do with that. So listen to them, understand what those things are that are meaningful, because that's what's going to make them better at your event. Know their preferences. This goes from what type of mic they want, to any allergies, to time of day, to what their appetite is for travel, and share that with your university partners, because you're not the only one planning these events, but if we can do it and uphold your university and share that, it gets great. And I will say, in speaking with a past president, he had also shared with me that one of the things to also remind our event planners is to check back in about their preferences, because they change. An example is at the beginning of his presidency, he told one person that he liked Italian restaurants, and boy, did that word spread out, and he had more pasta than anyone ever. And so it was, but nobody came back and said, you still want pasta? And people just assumed that that was his favorite food in the entire world. So make sure that communication is going there. And then I would also say, put them in front of the right people. So whether that is your leaders, community leaders, government officials, whoever makes the most sense, you want to understand, and again, using those people ahead of us to help determine who those people are, but provide those opportunities, whether they're in home, whether they're at events, but this is a great momentum. So I think that's my key takeaway here is seize the moment, right? So there's such great energy here. They have their messaging. They want to engage. So I think we get the privilege of providing them with those opportunities to take advantage. And how can we help them and share the university story? we often have press that like to pick on different public institutions or any institution. So this is a great opportunity for you to help control your narrative, involve students, campus partners, you're all stronger together. And once you go through something like this, you'll have relationships that will enhance all of their presidencies. And then I think have that open and honest communication. In retrospect, had I had a different conversation to start with, it may not have been planning 2 separate inaugurations, but now I know for our next time that I will. So that is mine. And I think we can open it up to any Q&A that you have for either Mark or I.
Great job, Anne.
Yes, thank you, Anne. I have a question, if that's okay. I'm curious in your experience with some of that pivoting and really, I hear you talking a lot about sharing the university story and also really getting to share that incoming president story, who they are, and introducing them. What is kind of the strategy around frequency of touch bases, both with that president's office team and then also with your events team? Like, how often does that happen? Like the actual strategy in your mind, or in an ideal world, I guess.
In an ideal world, I think it would be happening a lot more than it probably.
You're just on the phone all the time.
These are very busy people, right? So I think that is developing that relationship with those core people, because they're the ones who have the face-to-face more often. When we started this, the first inauguration planning, I think we met every other week. As things got closer and changing, it may have become weekly for a little while there.
Sure.
But that's what we needed to do at that time. And I think following, we rely on our people to help communicate messages. And when we can get face-to-face, whether it's before an event or through briefings or stuff like that, then we continue to have these ongoing conversations. I don't know if Mark or Lindsay, you have to add to that.
Yeah, we have a position in our office of the president called the assistant for events. And so we work with her directly for everything that is related to events on the president's schedule and in which he is participating or hosting. And I meet with her once a week, just period, about everything that's going on in general, in addition to each event having its own weekly touch base with whomever on the university committee is assigned to support that event. I will say also, for most major events, we do a briefing directly with the president about a week in advance. For the inauguration, he did have some last minute surprises that we made work. But for the most part, I think that having that, to your point, that one dedicated person in his or her office that can relay the message is very important.
Wonderful, thank you. Question for all in the chat. How did people include delegates from peer institutions? How much programming do they expect to participate in?
So on our original plan, we had a whole slew of delegates. And again, we never actually sent out that formal invitation for this, right? But in researching for others, I think there was an expectation, and Bethany's on this call and she, I think, is smiling because she was in charge of that section of the inauguration planning, but there was an expectation about delegates and then what do you do, right? Do we have to figure out their lodging? Do we have to figure out all of those things that go along with sending this in? So when we changed our plan, it actually made things probably a lot easier in terms of delegates. They were still invited and some came, but we were hands off. We gave suggestions of where they could stay or eat or do, but we didn't plan any of that for them.
I think at the breakup at Maryland, we're a small state, so it's not that far to travel from one side to the other, but all of our presidents from other University of Maryland institutions were invited as attendees.
Great conversation. I do see we have some additional questions. I will pose that back to our speakers in an email, and we can do some follow-up with any questions that came in the chat after our breakout session ended. Thank you guys so much for attending our first breakout session.
Thank you, Lindsay.
We'll see you back in the large group. Hello. Welcome, welcome. I'm just going to give 10 more seconds for everybody to kind of get into this breakout session here. All right. Welcome to our second breakout session of our virtual conference. Just to make sure we are all in the correct place, this breakout session is bidding farewell to the outgoing president. I'm Lindsay Belland. I'm going to be our breakout facilitator. And really all that means is that I'm going to be paying attention to the time for us and for the chat. If you have any questions, you can certainly drop them into the chat. I'm happy to read those out loud to the group or answer them as they come up. I am going to introduce our speakers for this breakout session. Today we have Ann Wilczek. She is the Director of Events at the University of Minnesota Foundation. And Tiffany Romer, she's the Associate Vice President of Events and Creative, also at the University of Minnesota Foundation. And if I have both of you on here, which I think I do, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. I am Tiffany Raymer. I lead the Events and Creative team at the University of Minnesota Foundation. I've been with the foundation for 20 years. You know, some of us get into academia and we just don't ever leave. And in that time, we've said farewell to 3 different presidents. So that's a little snippet of what Ann and I will be sharing with you today.
And I am Ann Wilczek. I've worked at the foundation for 18 years and like Tiff, have had the opportunity to work with these 3 different presidents. So we will just get started on our experience. So as I mentioned, and Tiff said, we have 3 different presidents here that we are going to be connecting with. And I think it's important to note that of these 3 individuals, they're 3 very different people with different connections to the community, to the university, and with faculty and staff. And when I think about it too, they have 3 very different styles, whether that be personal styles, leadership, communication styles, and also very important, 3 different, very social, political, and economical climates.
Yeah, you know, so I was at the foundation for 7 years with the same president, and that was President Bob Brunings there at the top. And we're going to do a little presidential speed dating here with you, just to give you a little context around each of their tenures, because you can see the timeline there of our farewells spans about 12 years, 2011 to 2023. And that doesn't seem like that long a time, but when you think about everything that has changed in that 12-year period, they are drastically different. So were the people. So Bob Brunings, he served as president 2002 to 2011. He had a 45-year history at the University of Minnesota on his retirement. He began in the late 60s as an assistant professor and did the very traditional higher ed progression through the ranks. Assistant professor, professor, department head, dean, provost. He hit the 35-year mark and he was going to retire from administration, take a sabbatical for a few years, and then come back and teach. And then the president at the time stepped down. And Bob was asked if he would please stay on as interim president. And after about 5 months of a search, they decided that the interim president was actually the best candidate and asked him if he would take the job, stay on through a whole contract. And so he and his spouse kind of unpacked their bags and gave up that sabbatical, and he stepped into the role. He was really pretty universally admired. And I'm sure he had critics. If they were critics, they were critical of his policies, not of his motives. So very deep ties to the community. His spouse, Dr. Susan Hagstrom, is a Minnesota native, a U of M alum, extremely accomplished professional in her own right. At the time that he became president, she was running her own wildly successful consulting firm. So they both had really, really deep ties to the whole community and the state. Brunings led the university through the economic recession of 2007, 2008. That was a huge deal. And the rebound then that started in 2009. And among countless other accomplishments that he had, he really prioritized throughout his presidency enhancing relations with students, faculty, and staff, right? Because that's where he came from. He knew what he knew, and the whole state of Minnesota.
Our next president number 2 on the speed dating is Eric Kaler. If I think to start off by saying he was an accomplished engineer. Just said that way. So he's also been noted for his laser focus on measurable results. So he was totally into data, very driven by information that way. And that seemed to be his more focus. He was very invested in fundraising and traveled globally to engage with different stakeholders. So that was very big, meaningful lift for him as well. His spouse has been very involved in our institution. She hosted hundreds of events at the University of Minnesota and wanted to be very involved. And he made sure that she was as well, which was great for both of them. And really, I think about him and I think about how he really enhanced the business relations with the community. So he was very business, chemical engineer, measurable as well, with a spouse who was very involved and loved to be with events. Our next president, Joan Gable, you'll see, I don't know if any of you were in there, but we just talked about in her inauguration. That was in 2019. And as you can see here, her end date was 2023, which was just last month. So she was our first woman president. Her husband, Dr. Gary Gable, was not as involved with our university. He is a professor at another university, and I think just with that relationship, hasn't been invested as maybe some of the others spouses there. She is very passionate about social justice issues and mental health. She enhanced our relations with the Indigenous communities and made it a priority to acknowledge our ugly history and create a report on what that is, acknowledging and owning that, which was huge. From her tenure date and nearly her entire presidency happened during the pandemic. So we went into lockdown 6 months after her inauguration. So she led through some of the hardest times of the pandemic, the murder of George Floyd, and the unrest that took place in the city of Minneapolis quite heavily during that time. And I will say she did it with care and compassion, and she was really the right person to lead through that really difficult time for our university. Given that timing and with COVID and some of the other things, the events team didn't have the same opportunity that we've had with our other presidents to really establish the personal relationships and preferences and just kind of your rhythm with your president. And that's, again, largely due to COVID, and we weren't producing in-person events the same way we had. And so she, finally, when she did leave, she chose to leave her contract early to go, which does play into how we bid farewell.
So we're going to move now to just telling you a little snippet about each of their farewell events. And you can see both some of the context we've just shared with you reflected in these events and kind of signs of the times reflected in these events. So for Bob and Susan, and we will be referring to our presidents and spouses from this point on by their first names. We wouldn't typically do that publicly, but A, your family because you're event planners, and B, it just makes it go faster. So Bob and Susan's farewell was at the end of 2010. His contract ended in 2011, and it was a large-scale formal gala dinner, fully produced show with multiple musical numbers and a full band and skits and student performers, tributes from donors and legislators and dignitaries, our grand organ rising out of the orchestra pit to begin the show, the entire marching band. We covered all of the orchestra level seats in our big auditorium, Northrop Auditorium. At the time, it sat 4,000 people, so quite large. It has since been renovated. But we covered all of them and made dining platforms so that we could actually host the dinner and the show in the same space. The event was on the same scale as the previous campaign launch that had happened 10 years prior. So that was how big we went with that particular event. Again, Bob and Susan both well-loved, well-connected, well-known, incredibly well-respected. And I would never say that galas are even remotely out of style. There is still very much a time and a place for galas. We're seeing less of a call for them these days. 2010 was still very, very firmly in the this is how you celebrate someone in a big way gala era. So it was appropriate to the time.
So the President Kaler, Eric and Karen, theirs was a very different vibe. We had set up a time just to connect with him, and he like, okay, you're leaving. What do you want this to feel like? And fun, laughter, joy, celebration. Didn't want any black tie, didn't want that formal aspect, and didn't have the same types of relations that our previous president did. However, he had about 300 friends there, and it was fun. So we went into what are those favorite foods? What are their favorite memories? This was just as much about her as it was about him, as we talked about. He did events for her, and because it brought her so much joy, and he went along with it because he's a good guy. So anyway, that's what it was. We had, as you see over there, there's butterheads that are sculptures of them that were at an event when they first came to the university. We had their friends told stories, their friends / donors. He was a big fundraiser. Told stories on the thing. We had videos produced that really were almost parodies and kind of poking a lot of fun at him and complimenting her. Actually both, but really it just was an opportunity to almost just let your hair down and have some fun and celebrate in a different type of a way for a university. And then for Joan, as noted, she left earlier this summer. She made that decision to leave, and so things looked very different. Her farewell really mirrored her presidency, the timing and her personal preference. So several events, already existing events, were leveraged to really have that moment to say goodbye. And really, we captured those audiences which were most important to her. They were low-key, intimate gatherings. There was another gathering that was just at a campus club, nothing exciting or formal, but it was just a moment for her staff to get to be a part of that and say goodbye to her. So I would have calculated this in the poll as not having an event, or not having a standalone event for your president, outgoing president. And as mentioned too before, her husband wasn't as involved in the farewell. So we didn't make this a family affair. This was about those smaller groups that just wanted to thank her.
So how do you decide what type of experience is going to be best for your president, and maybe as importantly for your university? Lots of important considerations, just like there are with any event that we produce, right? What's the climate, the social climate, the political climate, the economical climate? How is your president viewed by others? What's their reputation? How strong is their connection to the U and to the community? What kind of message do you want this event to communicate? What will the guest perception be of the tone and, the expenditures? What will your donors think? If the general public sees photos, especially in this day and age of social media, what will their perception be? It is one thing that we are facing now that we weren't facing in 2010. And not that there was anything untoward going on, but there wasn't the same kind of scrutiny because there wasn't the same kind of access. We always have optics top of mind, of course, but with an event like this, we need to maintain an even higher degree of sensitivity to those optics, especially around expenses. Nobody wants to see massive sums of money being spent to say goodbye to someone. Now, Bob was an exception to that. The situation was so unique with his service and his nearly 50-year tenure at that point. We should note that to a certain degree, considerations about the opinions of the general public might differ here based on whether you are a public or a private institution. In either case, though, while sensitivity to the taxpayers' opinions might be very different, all of us always want to demonstrate that we are good financial stewards.
Exactly. So another consideration is, when do you blend that personal and professional, those personal and professional elements? Do they blend? So for Bob and Susan, they were like the university family. So that event that Tiff produced was like the family reunion, and it felt that way. And you saw in the pictures, the hugging, that everything that was in there, that was that feel. For the Kalers, again, this farewell was for them, for her, for both of them. So what we did was really infused a lot of different things. You will see that there, but just those relationships over the year. And for the Gables, they were more private. It wasn't in their comfort zone to infuse any of that. And I will say, you know, during COVID and during some of those times, she was relatable. She went out of her way and probably out of her comfort zone to share stories of her own family to help the morale and the comfort of going through COVID with this university community. So it's not like she didn't share, but she didn't invest that family or that personal dynamic as often as some of the others there. So infusing that personal message aspect to them for her wasn't necessarily needed, wanted, or even appropriate at that point.
So we'll share a few personalized elements that we had at these events to give you some ideas. Bob, again, everybody was their family. Everybody knew and understood the inside jokes, so there were tons of them. Bobisms. He was well known for using quotes all the time, many of them very corny. That was just who he was. And we used some of those as interstitials up on the screen for transitions in between set changes and that sort of thing. Most of those got pretty big laughs. But they both are accomplished equestrians. And so the show actually included a video greeting from his horse, Bobo, kind of like Mr. Ed. If anyone here besides me is old enough to remember who Mr. Ed is. They are both opera lovers. So we featured opera students from our School of Music. They performed Susan's favorite piece from Carmen. And we had a custom parody wrote of Gilbert and Sullivan's I Am the Very Model of a Modern Major General that was retitled and re-lyric to be He is the Very Model of a President Personified. That went over big. Their scholarship recipient, they had established a scholarship years before. Their scholarship recipient, the current one then spoke, as did many community leaders, donors, media personalities. A few of the tributes were delivered from a set piece built to be a rough model of Bob's office. You see that in the top corner there, because everyone had been in that office. His office was famous for the giant walleye over his desk that he famously caught. We are in Minnesota, y'all. And at the time, he was proud to tell you, the second largest walleye ever caught in the state. We were also in the midst of a U of M marketing campaign at the time called Because. So you'll see the Because model on his desk. Toward the end of the show, this was a really personal element. Bob's son, Todd from California, who wasn't able to join us because he and his wife had just had a baby a few weeks prior, joined via video. This was not live stream. This was 2010. You couldn't really live stream reliably or predictably. So this was a pre-recorded video that we pretended was a live stream. And he shared a story about his dad and the infamous walleye. And then at the end, he introduced Bob and Susan's brand new grandson, Zane Robert, after Bob Brunings. They had kept his middle name a secret from Bob and Susan. They said he didn't have one, and they announced it then. So of course, there was not a dry eye in the house. They teed up the marching band, and that's how the show ended. So these are all elements that represented many of their favorite people and things. And that's what we're trying to accomplish with events like these, personalizing them. They're real people with real likes and dislikes. If you were planning a going away party for a family member or a friend, you'd focus on their favorite thing. So the same principle applies here.
Yeah, that's great. So for the Kaylers, as mentioned, we did several videos with kind of spoofs, which was funny because, you know, we all know our presidents and what gets them excited or what doesn't. And he had basically the same face for every single video that he ever started with. Hi, I'm Eric Kaler. And it was the same tone, same thing. And so we did a video of a blooper of all of those pieces and tied that together. We also created a really fun animated video with photos that we did to the song I've Been Everywhere, because he was known for traveling and going everywhere and meeting everyone. So hundreds of pictures were in there, and just really fast paced, and it was a great way to show the breadth of what they did in a 3-minute video. So that was well received and funny. As part of that, if you were part of the traveling party with him, you soon would have learned that he loves Dairy Queen. So in the video, we mentioned Dairy Queen, Dairy Queen, Dairy Queen, Dairy Queen multiple times. So as soon as that program was done, we opened up another back room where it was full of dilly bars and all of the Dairy Queen treats as kind of that tribute. We also took a look at the foods, like learned that he loves sushi. We never had sushi. Again, going back to the comment in the previous session, like we need to check in on what those preferences are. So we really tried to do all of their favorite things, from food to music to family to who they want included in that program. Again, we know she loves all those personal touches. So the decor had a lot of photos in them, a photo wall, all sorts of things that were meaningful to her. And she even wanted and has dreamed of having trumpets in this one little area for her whole time. And she always told us, I mean, it's a great idea. It's not always feasible. Anyway, we made it happen, and we gave her her herald trumpets in her little area that she has wanted forever. So again, making those favorites and tying them in. I will also note, obviously, there's not anything here for President Gable. We honored the fact that it wasn't in her comfort zone, and we didn't infuse it. It wasn't the right thing to do at that time.
So that kind of brings us to the final, but maybe the most important consideration. How did they feel about events during their tenure? That's going to tell you what you need to know. Bob and Susan, they loved to be with the people. It was like family for them. They wanted to attend and be involved in all of the events, sometimes to a fault. Loved them both, but sometimes to a fault. The Kaler's events were less important to him, but very important to her. Karen always said that they considered attending events a privilege, and they would remind each other to kind of soak in those moments. For Joan, the event climate was a hot mess during 95% of her tenure due to COVID. They're more private people by nature, and she was president during a much more challenging time. So in addition to her personal preferences, she didn't really have a chance to make the same kinds of connections and develop those relationships as fully. So how they felt about events throughout their presidencies will tell you all you need to know about how they want to engage. You don't really need to try to predict or have a crystal ball. You just need to reflect. And can't stress enough to lean into personalizing things to really highlight who they are, what they most want, and what they will most enjoy. We all know how to engage audiences. We do it all the time. This is what we are charged with. This time, your outgoing president is your audience. So flip the principle and you'll be good to go. And I think that brings us to the end of our presentation here. Lindsay, do we have a couple of minutes left?
Yeah, we actually have a decent amount of time left. We have about 8-9 minutes open. Thank you both, Anne and Tiffany, for that presentation. I think we have some time for Q&A or just some thoughts, conversation.
We would also love to hear from you too. What have you done that has been helpful or insightful that you want to offer to this group?
I can share. Like I said, our previous president, he left in May of 2022, and there were still like some COVID things lingering that were affecting them personally, but also a little bit too at the university. So we had a pretty informal, casual farewell plan for them. But then we had to postpone it and then reschedule it. And so that impacted who could come, right? So the guest list was much larger for the first one, but when we changed the date, it became less so, which was fine. They were very understanding and very laid back about it. One thing they did too, which I thought was really neat, was they had a picnic in the backyard at the house for all the people internal to Penn State who helped them at the house. So it was Office of Physical Plant. They invited them, they invited us because we did a lot of the events at their house. All kinds of internal vendors, police services, lots of groups like that. So I would say it was probably over 100 people that attended. And I thought that was really nice to sort of pause and really for them to reflect back and say, wow, we couldn't have done this at this house without all of your help. So I thought that was a really nice touch.
Yeah.
That says a lot about them. How cool.
We had the luxury of having a year's notice that our president was going to leave. And so we were able to take advantage of the alumni roadshow we already had scheduled and use those events for farewell to the alumni population as well. And he was very clear that he didn't want specific things about that. So it was kind of more like a subtle farewell at those events. He didn't want it to be the focus of them, but that was a great way to be able to involve alums who would not have been able to come to campus for the bigger things we were doing here.
That was really smart, Megan. And, Megan just hit on a really important point. How much time, how practical consideration, how much notice do you have? President Brunings, we knew he didn't want to be president in the first place. Thank goodness he took that job. Thank goodness. And then he loved it when he did it, but he was ready to be done. So we all knew when that current contract was done, he was done. So technically we had 9 years notice that this was going to need to happen at the end of his tenure. We started planning like you did, Megan, about a year in advance for that one. For President Kaler, we had a perfectly appropriate notice and time to plan what was happening there. His contract was coming to an end. He took another position that would, start up right after that. And so we had a significant planning period. For President Gable, we had about 2 months, a month and a half. And, thankfully, she wouldn't have wanted a big to-do anyway. So it worked out fine. But that could have been a whole different story if we had needed to try to punt on that.
I think it's really interesting just to see the changes over the course of time from 2002 to 2023, the types of events, the types of engagement, and really almost just that taking that temperature of what's happening in our world and specifically in our community. And I know Ann and Tiff are both from UMF. And so it's just interesting to see and observe how much of a priority the things that are happening in our world and in our communities really are playing in the events that we're putting on at our universities day in and day out, and certainly with bidding farewell to outgoing presidents. So thank you for speaking to that.
That's a really good observation, Lindsay. I thought it was really interesting too, the poll right before we came into this breakout group, that nearly half of us really haven't done a big farewell to presidents. And again, Chrissy, you touched on this so well. That could be for any number of reasons. It could be that that was not their preference. It could be that they left during COVID. It could be that there were economic considerations. Who knows? But I do think that there is a trend away from the big, well, there's definitely a trend away from the big hoopla farewell, tying together with what I learned in the last breakout session and some of what was talked about in between. I think it also goes hand in hand with presidents starting to want to put other stuff front and center and not themselves. Now, to be clear, neither Bob nor Susan would ever have put themselves front and center. So that's not what I'm insinuating. But I think that on the whole, we are seeing that. Mark from Maryland in the last breakout that I was in talked about President Pines, who they inaugurated, and how really he wanted everything else out in front. He wanted to be kind of the supporting cast. And I feel like we're seeing that a lot more.
Yeah. Do have a message in the chat from Hannah. She's driving. Drive safe, Hannah. Thank you for still engaging. I'm driving, so I'll chime in via chat. We had 6 months notice on the recent separation, and we were surprised. This is from Ohio State. The president and first lady drove their plan, and we were responsible for executing. It wasn't ideal, but we adapted and completed the vision. So really interesting take on it.
Well, a couple shout outs to Hannah. One, excellent multitasking. Thank you for staying with us even as you're driving. Thanks, Chrissy. And two, that it's tough. The surprises are tough. It's also tough when you don't necessarily get to be in the driver's seat. I think that most of us that are producing events are pretty type A, and we're all darn good at our jobs. And that's challenging sometimes when you have to have that give and take. But well done being able to adapt on that one.
We have about 1 minute remaining in the breakout space. So just want to offer it up for any final comments or questions for Anne or Tiffany.
This is Anne Marie again. I just wanted to say thank you. This was wonderful. And I learned a lot. I can't even imagine when our president leaves what that'll be like, because he's so not a social person. So hearing all the differences of your three presidents was very helpful.
Thank you so much, Anne Marie. I hope you feel better too. I'm sorry you're not feeling well.
Thank you.
Well, we appreciate you all joining us today. It was really good to see all your faces and hear your comments.
Yes, thank you, Tiffany and Anne. Thank you guys for joining and engaging in this breakout. If any questions didn't get answered, I'll be going through the chat. I will copy and paste those. We'll get those to our speakers and they can be answered via email. And Anne Marie, I would just encourage, as you always do, stay in contact with UEvents, because when that time comes, we certainly know that we have a pool of resources here we can reach out to with those specific questions. So we'll see you guys all in the large group.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Welcome back, everybody. Thank you to Anne, Tiffany, Annie, and Katie. Great sessions. I popped in quickly to the first one and had to hop back out, but then I popped into the bidding farewell, and the University of Minnesota shared details about events that they planned for 3 departing presidents. I believe the first one starting in 2010, and they all had very different looks and feels. So it was a great session, which leads me to encourage all of you to, when you get time, to watch the videos and the recordings from all the breakout sessions, because I think there was a lot of really great, valuable information shared. It'll probably take us a week or so to get all that sort of cleaned up and organized to be able to send it out to you, but keep an eye out for it. So before we move to closing remarks, is there any morsels or details or information you want to share out to the overall group?
I'm happy to share out. I shared this in our breakout session, but I just found it so interesting to look at the timeline of the 3 different presidents that Anne and Tiffany spoke to, and their bidding farewell celebrations and how different they were. So, you know, like you mentioned, Chrissy, from 2010 to 2023, those looked and felt very different for different reasons. What was happening in our world in 2010 versus what's happening in our world in the last year. A variety of components kind of came into that. It was just an interesting observation. And I think even harkens back to what Jen was talking about at the beginning of our conference today, which is that change is inevitable and we have to kind of be prepared and be ready to pivot as things change and as our world moves and changes as well. So just an observation.
Anybody else?
I put this in the chat. It's Anne Marie again, but this was wonderful. I mean, from how you all brought it out on, on our emails to the end product, it was so wonderful. And I really enjoyed it very much. And I learned a lot. And it's also really nice to connect with everyone again. And so I really value this group and thank you all for putting this on today.
Oh, thank you so much. It's really nice to hear. We appreciate it. Well, so as we conclude the UEvents first virtual conference, I'd like to thank you all for committing time to attend and to invest in yourself, your teams, your president, and your institution. My philosophy has always been about attending conferences or webinars or trainings, that if you take away one little morsel, one little best practice, advice, ideas, inspiration, then it was worth your time. Please keep an eye on your email for a post-conference survey and upcoming events, UEvents news. Our next gathering for UEvents will be in September for a coffee and conversation. I want to thank you again for joining us. We do have a very short exit poll, if you wouldn't mind doing that before you log off. And again, thank you and have a great day.